Good morning, listeners, and welcome to 107.5 FM WLRH Lecture Radio. I'm Vivian, the real main character of Holly's story. Jordan needed a little break from last time, so I'm here to host. Shoutouts this week go out to CO Bilf, Power Lies to Paralyze, and a new friend, Amir. From the paperwork my host left, it looks like we're starting today off with Lecture 10, Q&A period, ending in intensive. I don't know why you all do this to yourselves, but to each their own, I guess. Buckle in, sip some coffee, and let's get into it.
All right, you haven't, let's see, what is this? This is the 8th of June, 1961, solar system. I have to keep you oriented. You haven't had any opportunity to ask any questions. The last couple of lectures, I have simply decided what you didn't know anything about and filled you in. So now I want some questions. Of course, kind of cowardly asking you for questions in the first place because it assumes that I don't know what you're fogged up on. Yes?
Exactly how and when the havingness and confront commands and where are fitted into a run on SOP goals, just where they go in relation to running the
when do havingness, or where do havingness and confront commands get fitted into SOP goals? Actually, I'll answer it for all sessions.
Yeah.
If you have the PCs, havingness and confront commands, you start the session with them after the rudiments and end the session with them when this room situation goes. When you ask about the auditing environment. The point there is you run them backwards at the end. You run the confront and then you run the have. You just run them at the beginning, have, confront, that is after the beginning rudiments, and at the end rudiments you run them confront and then have. This actually is quite mechanical. You can take these two processes and throw the guy into his bank. See, you bring him into the room and then throw him into his bank. Just look at it that way. He comes into the auditing room, and you say, is it all right if I audit you in this room? You know, you say something like this, and he says, all right. You say, all right. As far as you're concerned, it's all right. But you haven't got him in the room yet. Now, if you've got his havingness and confront, you move this over into his first process. In other words, you bypass the rudiments. You ask him, it's all right to audit in this room. We don't care what he says. If you're going to run his havingness and confront process, the first thing you do, what does it matter whether it's all right to audit in the room or not? You're going to straighten this up shortly anyhow. Well, why isn't it all right to audit in the room? Well, he probably has a PT problem, an ARC break, and a withhold. That's why it's not all right to audit in the room. So who cares? It's there in the rudiments mostly to call attention to the fact that there is an auditing room, which might have been missed by the PC. You get the idea? All right, so that's not anything that you handle, although there is a process given to handle it. But that process assumes TR10 in the model session that you don't have the PC's havingness and confront processes. So you say, is it all right to audit in this room? And it goes, wham, crash, and you say, fine, and go right on to your next rudiment. Don't use that as an excuse to waste auditing time. You got the idea? There's no point in it. If you've got his havingness process, all right, now let's finish up the rudiments. And our first process is now going to be a have process. And of course that was mainly ARC break, PT problem, and withhold, or one of them. So you've taken care of that now. Now you can bring him here. See, a present time problem has got him out there somewhere. So you can knock that out. Of course, he's more here, isn't he? So you run your rudiments, and then you saw into the have and confront processes immediately after the rudiments. You have first, and then you confront. Well, you've handled his PT problem, his withhold, his ARC break, and so forth, so therefore he's more willing to be in session. You run the havingness process, and of course he tends to leave where he has been and arrive where he is at. And now you run the confront, and you say, you're saying just the same as, just between you and me, I think you ought to take a look at your bank. It is time you cease to avoid all this. It's a question of how can a Thetan live in this much mush? You got the idea? So you say, well, let's now take a look at your bag. Let's take a look at your case. You could say this, you see, very splendiferously. Theoretically, you could do that. You say, well, here you are in the room. You've straightened it up so the guy can be audited, and here you are in the room, and now, what do you think about your case? Okay. Well, instead of saying, well, what do you think about your case, you run a confront process. All right, confront processes cycle. They go out of PT and into PT. So if you are very clever, you will run just one cycle, out of PT and into PT. See? You're very clever. Out he goes and back he comes. You say, look, it is safe to leave present time in this room. One, the room is safe. We have just run headiness on it. And two, we are now demonstrating to you that it is very safe for you to slide down the track a little bit. And when you come back, you'll still find the room here. What do you know? You're saying that in essence then when you're running the confront process. So, all the processes today, all security checks, all everything, if in doubt about how to say good morning to the pre-clear, say it in model session. Use model session for everything that pertains to auditing. This does not apply to a Johannesburg security check given for purposes of security only. There you don't even bother to clear the commands. You try to clear the commands, and if you don't clear the commands, you look at the fellow and say, well, now listen, if I have to leave this one with it still falling off the pin, you realize you failed the security check. Are you sure there is nothing you wish to tell me? He thinks it's over for a minute. He says, well, maybe I better tell him about the bank robbery, you know, the illicit diamond mine. And so he sometimes gives up like that. But you wouldn't work day and night, on and on and on and on and on to clear somebody's security check. You see, if it were beginning for an employment security check. In the first place, somebody whose security check is so bad that, particularly on the subject, the original question, by the way, have you ever cooked a company's books? It sounded just a little bit slangy to me. It out-created me on the subject. Have you ever cooked a company's books? And you now have that under the heading of falsified, I think it is. And you strike that one, you see, while you're security checking somebody for employment. And it goes clang, and what do you want to clear it for? You wouldn't have the guy on a bet. All right, so we finally find out, well, he only falsified him a little bit. He's just been entering everything into the petty cash column and sticking it in his pocket, or he's been doing something innocent here that should never be reprehended anyhow. When you're security checking, as a security check, just in passant here, you must know what a meter's talking about. It takes a good auditor to do security checking. You can't teach somebody in 10 minutes how to do a security check and then trust any result he gets. Because what's he do? He gets somebody on the meter, and there's no meter responses of any kind whatsoever. You know, the person's totally irresponsible anyway. Dead Thetan reading properly at the clear read, and it all says there, that's all right with that. He asks all the way through the security check rapidly. He gets no reaction of any kind whatsoever, so he says the person's secure. The person just got out of Dartmoor scrubs, you know. Just that day. So you have to know something about PCs and the meter in order to size up the person. And if they're not getting any reactions anyplace on a Johannesburg security check, you know, this is impossible anyway, you're auditing it. Right? But you don't run that model session, and you finish the check in any event, no matter who you're running it on. You always finish the check. But you don't necessarily spend 4 hours clearing up one level. You just want to know if he's hotter than a pistol on these various levels. One of the ways to do it is to go right on through the check, whammity, 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 wham, getting all the withholds that he gives you as you go by, and then you've marked several that didn't know, and go back over these and ask searchingly about them, something on the polite, non-auditing attitude of, well, you realize that if these levels retain withholds, as they apparently do, and you have not told me all, which you obviously haven't, that if you fail to do so, That is it. You have failed a security check and will be rated here as an insecure person. Now, do you want to tell me about it? And the fellow says, well, a meter must be wrong, and so forth, and so forth. You say, okay, you've had it. Reach down to the bottom of the page and say, failed check, such and such date, unemployable. That's it. Don't monkey with it. That's not true in auditing, you see. You run that in model session and you get those questions just as clean as wolf's teeth. You see, there's a tremendous difference between getting a processing check and a security check, even though you're using the same list of questions. Now, you just take those things apart. So en passant, I'd mention it. All right. Havingness and confront is run after beginning rudiments in the order of the have and then the confront, and before end rudiments in the order of the confront and the have. Okay?
Thank you.
Right. Any other question? Yes.
You've told us this before, but it hasn't sunk in. I'd like to tell us again.
Okay.
If you've got something which is being re-stimulated by the questions in the security check, but it doesn't seem to be on the first ones, would you go on through and then check back on them afterwards?
Not in processing. In doing a security check for employment or loyalty or something of this sort, some other purpose, yes, you would do it as you said it, but not for processing. You do not leave a falling level behind you. Leave nothing falling behind you. That's pretty hard to do. You very often get them falling on later things and in a panic about withhold. But remember, if it's been carefully given in model session, you will have the opportunity to ask the PC if he's withholding anything in the model session. And the reason you've got withhold in there at beginning and end rudiments is because you get 2 cracks at the PC every session. So, if a question were hanging up in that particular fashion, and you couldn't seem to get anything out of the PC or get it clear, you might suspect, because of the sporadic reaction of the needle, if it's not on the button, you see, it doesn't act constantly, it acts sporadically. That means you're near something, but you're not on it. It falls and it theta bops and it rock slams and it goes null and it falls and then it goes null and then it rock slams, and it's not asking the right question, that's all. And if you were to get, I didn't say that you should get baffled at this point, but if you were to get baffled, you know, about the whole thing, a good thing to do is to take a break. Well, you'd take a break by ending your session, wouldn't you? So that gives you a crack at the withholds, doesn't it? And then you take a 3-minute break, and then you start a new session. And this gives you another crack at the PC's withholds when you're clearing that rudiment, you see. And this time you'd clear the rudiments real hard, the end rudiment and the new beginning rudiment. And by the time you got back to the questioning, and you've probably gotten the withhold that he kept ticking or tacking on, and that question now will probably be free. And that is really the right way to handle it. I'm sure you can see the sense of that. And the other point to make here is your PC, if he's doing this, is probably having trouble. And there's another correlated factor of this. If a PC is having trouble, his attention span is poor. If his attention span is poor, the best remedy for that is short sessioning, which in itself is a technique. If you were to take a PC who's having a lot of trouble, and you were to begin a session and run TR10 as the sole body of the session, just 10 minutes of it, you see, and then run end rudiments and end the session, and then begin a session and run some more TR10 and end rudiments, you would, oddly enough, get a lot of cases with formal auditing that are really CCH cases. So it's well worth knowing how to do that. So it is not a waste of time to do that. It is beneficial to do that. And I'd recommend that if you were having an awful lot of trouble giving a processing check, that you also add in this thing called short sessioning. You could go at it like this, a session per question if he was having too hard a time. And then you'd sure get it every time. But that would be the extremity, the reductio ad absurdum. Okay, that answer your question? All right. Any other question? Yes, Reg.
On the assessing for goals, we have the goal, the terminal, and the level line, and you tell us that each reaction should be the same for each. Roxanne, throughout. Now, if on the primary scale you get your same reaction, is it then necessary to go on to the secondary scale?
No, this is a matter of judgment. Let me clarify up some things like this. This is the same reaction on the goal, the same reaction on the terminal, the same reaction on the primary. Now would you go over into the secondary scale? Would it really be necessary to assess the secondary scale? Well, we've gotten here our first question that tells us actually the secondary scale at this stage is too complex. There actually will one of these days be a tertiary scale. And rather than spend the next 2 months keeping you from having something resembling a complete scale, I relegated my final sort out to after the first publication. So therefore, at this stage of the game, you find the secondary scale rather clumsy. There won't be anywhere near as many words as that on your present secondary scale when I finally get them all sorted. You see? A lot of those words will be over on the tertiary scale. So your question then, in the future, will also apply to if you find it on the primary scale, is there any reason to go on to the secondary scale if you find the same reaction? All right. It would also apply then, well, if you found the same reaction on the secondary scale, would there be any reason to go over into the tertiary scale? You get the idea. So the question could be broadened to include the whole future formation of the pre-have scale. And I'll answer it in that particular fashion. I myself had wonderful luck with the original issue, and the only ones that I missed aren't now on the primary scale except under motion and misemotion. The emotional states of PCs are missing on the primary scale. So what I would do would be to take certain selected levels as necessary levels. If somebody has an original pre-have scale, I will read you what those levels are. And I would say that if they fell on these levels, go to the secondary scale as a necessity. And if they don't fall on these levels, take it. Yeah, I can give you a qualified answer because it's a matter of judgment. I'm not trying to be complicated with you. Now, any level here that was on the original scale, if that fell as much as the terminal, good heavy reaction, I would go ahead and run it. I wouldn't much bother with going over into the secondary scale. But those levels here, which really weren't on the original, it would be safest to assess them again over on the secondary scale, even though they fell as hard as the terminal, for the excellent reason that they are too pervasive. With this odd exception, overts. Overts. Now, you've got an overt situation that if you get the general form overt falling as hard as the terminal, nothing has been told you, except the person has an attitude, and you can go ahead and run what have you done to, what have you withheld from, but you've already substituted an auditing command for this word overt. So you've done one substitution. So you for sure had better find out what kind of an overt. And the overt is the longest list. Apparently the English language has specialized in ways and means of overting. And for that reason, PCs have enormously odd categories for these types of overts. And for one PC, when they fall on the word overt, this means refraining to think an unkind thought about them so as to put them right, or something very complicated. And to another PC, it means hitting them over the head with a brickbat, and that is the only overt there is. You get the idea? And this is peculiar to the whole list of overts. Each PC has a different type of overt that he considers an overt. So it's such a matter for judgment that I for sure would move over into the overt list, even though overt fell like mad. I wouldn't then just automatically run do, because you've already done one substitution. What kind of a do? Let's find out. Because it'll fall on overt, but what does he classify as an overt? That is singular, the way that stands out. So you'd say, well, if you fall on overt, assess the secondary scale. That one for sure. Now, looking over the rest of these levels, there are two more, which, if they fail, would leave you with no recourse but to do the whole secondary scale. And you sure better head. And that's emotional and misemotional. You better find out what is misemotion. Is it standing woodenly, or is it screaming at the top of his voice, or what? So again, it requires the secondary list to qualify the term. Let me forget what I said there at first. I can give you a good test. I just thought of one here. Anytime you yourself would have to make a wild substitution for the level, assess the secondary scale. That would be the rule. Yeah, anytime you'd have to make a wild substitution to find out what it was all about, well, just move into the secondary scale, and you won't be guessing. Then you'd be safe. But if that is not the case, you can run any other of these levels. Let me say it that way. If that's not the case, you can run any others. Now, let me give you one further piece of data on that is interesting, and that is the goal fell a certain consistent amount or reacted a certain amount. The terminal then, in its turn, fell or reacted a certain amount. All right. That terminal's going to remain falling that amount, but when you check it back against the goal, you're checking it back as to how much the goal now falls. And this is not what's meant. It's how much did the goal fall. Because the second his attention comes off of the significance of goal and onto the solidity of terminal, you get a change on the goal's reaction. Your goal's reaction on your assessment sheets must be noted very precisely as to how many divisions of rock slam. Put it down in inches if you're not sure. Some guesstimate of inches. How much theta bop? How consistent? How much fall? How consistent? You put that down about your goal because you're now going to lose it. And you're not going to see that reaction on the goal until you've got a terminal cleared out of it. Now you may be able to go back and find a lot of reaction on the goal again. And you might not be able to. So let me clarify that just as long as it's part of this clarification. Yes, the terminal must fall as much as the goal, the level must fall as much as the terminal. But the terminal and the level alone can be measured against each other. You can't measure all in one breath the goal, the terminal, level. You can't say to pick gooseberries, General MacArthur, and failed withhold, and compare them one against the other. You couldn't do an operating condition of this character in auditing, because to pick gooseberries is lost back in the limbo someplace, you see. And you'd have to get that one from your notes. Now, is the terminal falling as much as you found the goal falling in your notes? Because this goal is now only falling in your notes. It's not falling on the PC this much. It still will react, but not as much. So checking your terminal against the level can be done, however, directly. You say, General MacArthur failed withhold. General MacArthur failed withhold. General MacArthur failed withhold. You wouldn't do that, but I'd say you could do that, and you'd get the same reaction for General MacArthur as the right level. And that would be the only test. But if anything leaves you in doubt, just to answer your direct question, if anything leaves you in doubt as to what auditing command to shove into this, on this primary list here, there's several here. Inverted communication. You get this awful fall on inverted communication, you see. Well, what's inverted communication? Of course, one of the phrases that you can use for it is intend not to communicate. But nevertheless, this could be other inverted communications, peculiar communications. Communication on a via is also a peculiar communication. You could ask, would you communicate to a cat on a via? And the terminal's a cat, you know. And you get an awful fall on this thing. Well, maybe you could run it directly, communicate to a cat on a via, but you've got an inverted communication secondary scale. It clarifies the whole thing for you. So it has a practical use as well as a pedantic one. Okay?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. Any other questions? Yes?
Well, it's still a further one, the havingness and confront. Originally, the thing on havingness and confront was you assessed for them after the first terminal was flagged.
Yeah.
Now I know of 3 cases, that had it added in.
Yeah.
Well, on the first terminal, I want to just add what point now on running SOP goals, you would look for the havingness and confront.
That isn't the question you asked. If that's the question you mean. All right. Okay.
When?
You asked when to run them.
When to assess for them and start including them in their sessions as a regular part of
All right.
SOP goals.
All right. I will also answer that. Answered it yesterday.
Yeah.
How many parts or stages or stops or pause points are there in routines 1, 2, and 3?
No, one at the end of beginning rudiments.
No, ma'am.
Oh, yeah.
Now you track with me.
Rudiment. Yeah.
You're going to insist this exact question be answered. You track on this one. Now, I'll take a look at it now.
Yeah.
How many places in the process of intensives would be pause points where you could use your power of choice on what you were supposed to do to the PC are there in routines 1, 2, and 3 consecutively?
As you finish each
No.
section of the routine, there's certainly a
Yes.
point.
As you finish each and every section, any level, any security check, any CCH step,
Yeah.
anything,
Yeah.
have and confront can be located.
All right.
There's no point in being pedantic about something that would be stupid to be pedantic about. You can find them anywhere, anytime, as long as you've got done what you were doing.
All right.
So you do a case assessment, you can find the PCs havingness and confront.
In other words, there's no particularly optimum time to start using.
Oh yes, well now that's a different question.
Yeah.
But that's a different question.
All right.
You asked me can. All right. Now, you write down his name, rank, and serial number, and finish off with how many of his parents deserted how many of his grandparents or whatever, see? And you got that all taped. You could turn right in, find his havingness and confront process. You could do this case assessment. You could find his havingness process. Then you could go ahead and run a Joburg security check and find his confront process. Oddly enough, you could find his confront process, and now we're getting unoptimum, immediately after you did this check, without damaging the PC in the least. Or you could do it when he was totally finished with routine 1. Wait until then to find his confront. You could find his havingness process, actually, at the time he flattened his first terminal on SOP goals running. By that time, you've got to have it.
All right.
And that happens to be just about your last hung dog. Going from there on without finding the havingness and confront processes is expensive in auditing time, because the PC never gets a chance to orient his bank or orient himself in the physical universe as he is running. So therefore, a great deal of auditing time is devoured from that point on, if his havingness and confront are not present. Less auditing time is devoured proportionately to your being toward the beginning of his auditing. The closer you are to the beginning of the auditing, the less auditing time is at stake. For instance, you find it immediately after your case assessment. You're wasting time. So when we get that close to the beginning, we're becoming silly. Because one Joburg is going to change his have and going to change his confront. So you found them for what purpose? For their use in 1 session, 2 sessions, 3 sessions. Now you're going to have to find another havingness and confront process. And you're also liable to get all balled up on, well, let's see, his needle keeps tightening and the tone arm keeps going stiff here on his confront, and I don't know what this is all about. It's just getting awfully confusing. I guess the PC is confused. No, he's changing. And you're going to have a harder time finding the havingness and confront the earlier you find them in a PC's intensives, not sessions. The earlier you look for them, the harder time you're going to have finding the havingness and confront process, and the more time you're going to use doing it, and the less use they will be to the PC because they're going to change anyhow. So you can get silly about this. See, it ceases to be just precautionary, and it becomes simply a flagrant waste of auditing time. All right, now let's move in to the CCHs. Let's say that this PC was going to be scraped all the way off the bottom. All right, all the way up the line, all the way through all routines. Got the idea? All right. During the CCHs, locating his havingness and confront is of no benefit of any kind because you are not running in model session. You're running CCHs. So when are you going to use the havingness and confront? So once more, you don't need the havingness and confront, but it would be perfectly all right to assess for them and get them. You got the idea? All right. Now we get up to a point where they become useful. They are now useful. And that would have to do with your general runs and Joburgs, you see. That would be useful. Now, in view of the fact that you're going to run Joburgs along with the CCHs, you nevertheless haven't got too many sessions going there, so and your Joburg and the CCH is going to change the case a lot. You're going to have to find new havingness and confront process. So you can just go on a treadmill of wasting auditing time by finding havingness and confront processes practically any time through routine 1. You just mark that right down in the book. Practically a waste of time because the case is going to change all over the place. And you're going to have to find a new one every time you turn around. So the PC's havingness runs down, so he's uncomfortable. Well, he's been uncomfortable for a couple of 100 trillion years. Well, it won't hurt him to be uncomfortable a little while longer. In terms of auditing time, it's rather wasted to try to find havingness and confront processes during the CCH and Joburgs that make up routine 1. All right. General prehab runs and Joburgs at that level. Now we're getting somewhere. But the first run flattened is sort of the PC getting used to what's going on and getting his feet under him. He's already grasping too much. You know, what's this? All my life. Goodness gracious, could this be true? He's terribly interested. These levels are running at absolute obsessive interest, practically, because you've got him, of course, right where he lives. All right, let's say, well, let's stop being interested, PC, and let's stop talking about all the things you're trying to tell me about, and let's throw all this away because it's not much importance to me. And we're going to find your havingness and confront process. We've got lots of time to waste here. You've bought 200 hours. Well, that's just about how it would sound to the PC. All right, but let's get that first level flat. Let's get that good and flat, and let's get our first Joburg done at routine 2. Let's get our first Joburg done, and let's get another level run and flat. Now the PC feels like he can breathe. And right about then it becomes economical to run your havingness and confront processes. And it's economical and continues to be economical right up to the point where it ceases to be adjudicative and becomes an absolute, utter necessity. And that's in routine 3, first level run on the PC's goal terminal. And if you haven't found the havingness and confront by that time, your PC is now going to start to run very slowly. And you're going to wonder why. Now, that's the whole story. So, possible anytime. Optimum sometime in the middle of routine 2. I'd say any time during the first third of the totality of routine 2, it's kind of wasteful, but after that it becomes quite economical to find them. Now you're saving auditing time. And during the CCHs, oh man, are you wasting auditing time. But you can find them. And it's perfectly okay, and the PC will tell you he feels marvelous, and isn't it a good thing, and his happiness is way down, and you just set him up so he can come into every session, and he's learned a new trick now. He hasn't got anything to think about. You're running the CCHs, see? He learned this new trick. My happiness is way down. How do people act? Let's see, it says in the textbook here, how do people act when their happiness is way down? See, it's a new trick. Then he'll say, well, gee, I've just found out there are a whole bunch of things I can't confront. This is a big cognition. So he obsessively wants to try to confront them. So you're starting to get a process in the road of your processing. The PC's interest becomes unduly absorbed any time during routine 1 with happiness and confront. That's all there is to it. Of course, I'm talking about raw meat, PC running in right from the beginning. That fairly clean, clear, and cool, collected? Well, I'm glad I finally answered your question.
Thank you very much.
All right. Any other questions? Okay. What day is today?
June 8th.
Yeah, I know it's the 8th, but what day is it? This is Thursday. Let's see. I'd better talk to you something about leveling off a case in just a few minutes. I'll just give you a few minutes. How do you level off a case? This would be true in an HGC, to be true in your private auditing, and so forth. A case is not going to get any processing for a while. What do you do? It is sequitur to exactly what we've been talking about with have and front processes. So I might as well add it in here. It is not just unkind, it is stupid not to end an intensive. Just as you would think it was stupid to fail to end a session. Similarly, it is very dull not to end an intensive. Well, an intensive of 25 hours is relatively uneconomical. But it nevertheless has to be ended. I mean, it's uneconomical to get 25 hours of auditing. A person just gets off the launching pad and he's just going over the end of the runway lights, and the control tower says it's time to whip stall. That's about what it sounds like, too. You see, the guy had just taken off, you know, and he just gets the idea that he might go someplace, and he whip stalls. 50 hours, that's fairly economical. He gets a chance to go someplace. All PCs could be compared to the frog who climbs out of the well at the rate of 3 inches up in the daytime and falling back 2 every night. But this is proportionate. The deeper he is in the well and the earlier he is in auditing, the more gain he makes up in the daytime and the further he falls at night. And so when we say ending an intensive, it is better to cleanly and properly end even a 25-hour intensive. It is better to do that than to say, well, it's a waste of auditing time, because he'll feel better for it if you do end it right. 50 hours, it's economical to end them, because you practically stabilize the person's gains. You bring him out of the woods, and so on. You end an intensive depending to a large degree on what has been run during the intensive. What has been run during the intensive. And you would end the routine 1 differently than you would end routines 2 and 3. 2 and 3 could be ended almost exactly in the same way. Let me say, what would be an optimum 25-hour intensive, even though it's uneconomical? A Joburg complete. One CCH flat. If you haven't accomplished those in the 25 hours, be rough. See? All right, how would you end this intensive? Well, you'd better end this intensive by making sure both of those are ended. The one CCH which you got flat, let's make sure that that's flat. And let's make sure that Joburg is now standing up and saying okay. That's how you'd end the intensive. You got the idea? I mean, you do no more than just check over these two items. Of course, you check over that CCH rather briefly because you can unsettle any process. Processes come to temporary flat points and then unflatten. All right, that's about the best you could do. Except during the last hour or so, it would be very beneficial to run TR10. Without model session or with it doesn't matter, but run TR10. All right, now let's take routine 2 or 3. How would you end the intensive? I'd say during the last few hours of the intensive, do nothing but run the heaviness and the confront processes of the PC. Now, in a routine 2 intensive of 25 hours, you should certainly have had one general level flat, and one Joburg completely completed, and the person's heaviness and confront process found, and you would spend at least the last 3 hours of the intensive, preferably 5, which would make the last HGC day of that intensive, doing nothing but running the have and confront process. Just run the have process to a loose needle, run the confront to a slowed tone arm. You know, tone arm doesn't look like it's wobbling very much right this minute, so now we're going to run some have, and then we're going back to the confront. Now we're going to run some have, we're going to run some confront, and it stabilizes the case most gorgeously. And he walks out of that intensive feeling marvelous. If you do that and do a good job, you've stabilized the gains. Otherwise, he's still kind of stuck in the intensive. He's still wishing he had some more auditing. He's still fixated on all kinds of little factors. And the kind thing to do to him is let him gain from his gains. And you level him out with your have and confront. Have, by the way, is never run further than a loosened needle. I see people running 10 minutes of havingness. This is incredible. Unless they're only getting in 5 commands in 10 minutes or something. This is incredible. That's an awful lot of havingness these days. All you're trying to do is run it from needle test to needle test, can squeeze to can squeeze. Is it looser? That's it. You've had it. That's it. And it's only about 12 commands. If you got the right havingness process, it's 12 commands. That's it. Now you can get fancy with the confront process and run it to what is called a blowdown. And that is to say, the needle rises and blows down. You come off of it. See, one cycle of the needle, of the tone arm, pardon me. One cycle of the tone arm. It will rise a little bit and blow down. And you run it until the tone arm rises largely or slightly, and continue to run it till it goes thump, or slides back, down a bit. And you come off of it and you run 12 commands of have. But somebody running 10 minutes of havingness is somebody, just like somebody eating sugar. You see, I think I'll have some sugar. Would you hand me that 100-pound sack? It's very hard on the digestion. And this is factual. You see, the have process can run the case, and you don't want it to run the case. You want it to orient the PC in the environment. Please get its purpose. See, you start running have, and you run more than 12 commands of have, and what happens? The PC's bank starts fluctuating. And next thing you know, he can run have against the bank. And you're running the bank with a have process, and you're not supposed to do that. You're supposed to run the bank with a confront process. So it's a misuse of the process. It's something like using a pair of shears to dig up a garden. Quite clever. And you run 10 minutes with it, and you've got the guy going through engrams, and his somatics turning on. That's havingness. Oh, yeah. You can do fantastic things with havingness. It isn't that havingness doesn't work, and it isn't that havingness won't run the bank, because it will. Boy, will it. But you've now started a new process known as running the bank with havingness. And you go more than about 12 commands with it, and you've started that new process, and you're going to get tone arm motion, and you better run it now till the tone arm motion gets out of it. But it's a misused process. It isn't for that purpose at all. It's to tell the PC, hey, look, physical universe. And he says, well, what do you know? Oh, physical universe, that's pretty good. You say, good. I'm going to give you 2 more commands in this process. And pow, that's it. And then you got the confront. You move right into the confront, get a jiggle out of the tone arm. Okay, let's see. This is the 9th of June, 1961 St. Hill briefing course. And you have had a bulletin today, or you should have had. It says something to the effect, I think, sarcastic, snide, asking you if you're waiting for the E-meter to play Dixie. And I expect almost anybody at any minute to say, no, we're waiting it to play God Save the Queen. But I'm quite happy about it, actually, in a fairly exuberant frame of mind with regard to, because I found out what's taking you so confounded long to clear people. And there's a general misconcept abroad. And although it's taken up in this bulletin, which is what, the 8th, HCOB 8 June 61, you're auditing people's analytical minds out. That's right. I mean, this sounds incredible, but that's what you're trying to do. And you know you're not going to shoot any ducks if you keep going around shooting at crows. Well, it's true, isn't it? Huh? I know, I've left you in a little bit of a mystery, but that is what you're doing. Dianetics, Modern Science of Mental Health, 1950. We change all the time. We change all the time. Except we're always dealing with the same fundamentals. All we're doing is changing an approach to the same fundamentals. Now, I say we change all the time sarcastically because somebody is always walking up to me telling us how fast we change and how we are changing and all that sort of thing. And I say, what have we changed lately? Oh, well, what have we changed lately? What have we changed lately? We've changed the axioms. The one thing that hasn't been changed for years. And I find out they don't know enough about the subject to know whether it's been changed or not. Which is always a good test if somebody tells you that. Now, what we are doing is trying to approximate exactly what the mechanics, which are already known to us about the mind, how these things are stacked up in people's minds, so we get a common denominator of approach. And, of course, it gets simpler and simpler, but we're always handling the same mechanics. So let's get back to a very fundamental here. And let's take a look at this thing called the reactive mind. I know you're all sitting there burning with questions about other things, but I'm interested in this today, and that is the reactive mind. The reactive mind is a mind which acts without inspection on the basis of stimulus. In other words, when this mind is re-stimulated, it acts without inspection. It's a non-inspection mind. Do you understand? And it puts into actions solutions for problems it fancies must exist, but which may well never have existed, or which haven't existed for billions of years. And you put in any part of the old problem, and the reactive mind goes into solution. It's a sort of an idiot simplicity. So it is a mind that solves problems without inspection. It's taken up pretty well in Dianetics, Modern Science, Mental Health. The only thing much we've changed about that book is the second part of the book, which has to do with how we address this situation. And heavens, how we address the situation in old Dianetics still is raising its ugly head. Lately, we've got Precession 38, which I haven't authorized anybody around here to use, but what is that? That book 1. And we've got all kinds of ramifications on the same fundamentals. So here's this mind without an inspection, all right? That's pretty good, you know. It doesn't have to make an inspection. See, that's the first thing that's wrong with the situation. So therefore, it reacts on anything it inspects. Got the idea? So the inspections are kind of accidental, because it's based to work without inspection. Of course, everybody knows that this is the safest thing to do. A Thetan is trying to survive who doesn't find any necessity for trying to survive at all, which is the first idiocy. You couldn't possibly kill a Thetan. You could degrade him, submerge him, make him unable, and do various things like this, or he could do these things for himself, but he couldn't possibly not survive. So the first thing it is doing is trying to solve a problem which doesn't exist. The survival of a Thetan doesn't exist. So therefore it immediately relegates itself to the survival of form, or the perpetuity of an existing state. If you can't keep a Thetan from surviving, you certainly, however, could keep a form surviving, couldn't you? But if you kept a form surviving, what you would have is a perpetuation of existing state, which would, of course, take out all the time, all the matter, all the energy, and all the space in a sensible arrangement and garbleize them. Why? All right. The reactive mind is the accumulated goals of survival of the individual for forms. And that is exactly what the reactive mind is. It's no more complicated than that. Its goal is survival in each case, you see. Now, the reason it destroys is because it's trying to get something to survive. You got the idea? It's trying to get self to survive, so it destroys other. See? But it's still survival. It creates something in order to get a form to survive. Even though you've got create and destroy, and even though you have a cycle of action, the reactive mind is that part of the cycle of action which is never going to move and never has, according to any understanding or activity in which man has engaged in all the time he has been on this planet. Why? Because the keynote of it is survive. Survival of a form. There's no question about the survival of a Thetan. Oh, there's a question of a survival of his capabilities. There's a question of survival of his happiness. There's a question of survival of whether or not he's interested. There's a question of all these things, but these are significances. As far as his actual survival is concerned, he'll be here till the universe fades out, even though he's only a crumb of sand. Got to be careful who I have words on here. Anyhow, now, here then is this enigma. You have a mind that is trying to make something survive which is already dead. It's gone, man. It's gone. This body you had back there on the galaxy of gee whizzes. Man, that form hasn't been around for a long time. Go back and look, dig up the old scrap heap where they threw the factory workers, and you won't find anything there anymore. Except a memory. Touching, isn't it? But the reactive mind, because it was trying desperately, you see, to make that form survive once, has never forgotten the impulse. That's pretty good. Because the impulse is survive, then the reactive mind's impulse regarding that action is surviving. Mm-hmm. It hasn't any more use to you. You could remember this, don't you see, if you didn't have to make it survive. But by remembering it, because of the impulse of survival being so great in that particular area, you get a re-stimulation as though you're still in the period, as though you're still there. Why? Because all the impulse of survival is trapped into that period and area, but it has been riding on up to the present time. Here's the great game of make-believe. The form has lived forever and is still here. What a game of pretense, you see. Well, the accumulation of these pretenses, with all of their attendant recordings and nostalgia, wind up in present time having nothing to do with the situation anywhere, but in order to guarantee the survival of this doll you lost back in the galaxy of gee whizzes, it is perfectly obvious that you have to do something about gorillas. Well, this is difficult because there just don't happen to be but about 450 of them left. They're the United Nations officials now. Anyway, they that's something on that order. There are very few gorillas left. And so the reactive mind has a great starvation for gorillas, which can make this thing survive. So a woman walks down the street with a fur coat, and a fellow has a feeling in his head of small machinery going around. Only because it's all by no inspection, you see, the safe thing to do is to act without thinking, because you never know what's going to happen to a form. The surprises have been multitudinous. So if you just act quick enough, the datum is, if you just act quick enough, why, the form goes on surviving. But if you could just duck bullets, give you an idea, see? An ambition of this character. Every time somebody fired a bullet at you in a war or something like that, if you acted quickly enough, of course you would never be hit. I know that's idiotic, but so's a reactive mind. Yet, sometime or another, you've had an ambition of that character. You've said, I wouldn't ever have airplanes run into me if I ducked every time I thought there might be an airplane in my vicinity. Well, it gets embarrassing, particularly when you're in basements. See, if you're going to get a form to survive, you mustn't wait until you look over the name, rank, and serial number of the aircraft. You see, the thing to do is duck. Actually, I knew a naval officer who has only one creditable action in his whole existence. And that was he actually did identify an American fighter craft that was coming back in over the fleet. And it had been mauled up, and it was making it all right. It was trailing smoke, and he did identify it, and he did restrain, at the last instant, his people from firing at that aircraft. He did restrain them. The aircraft was shot down by the next ship in line. But that was a creditable action, and I wish to assign it to him. It shows you that not all men are all bad. But this was very unusual for him to do such a thing, which is why it stands out in my mind. It's almost incredible for the man to ever have inspected anything. Yet he did in this particular case. But the safe thing, reactively, to do is, of course, shoot at an aircraft without inspection. Well, when fellows get all gingered up by war, they're liable to do things like this. Actually, the only thing wrong with wars is you put weapons in the hands of men and get them marching around. Some of those guns will go off and somebody's liable to get hurt, and that's the only thing wrong with war. Otherwise, they're fine. So, there was a little Dutch Corvette, and it had escaped from Java when it was abandoned by the Associated Allied Admirals Union. And they had to work overtime, so they abandoned it. Anyway, this little Corvette escaped. Well, I myself was in a sort of a gingery frame of mind, and had very often gone clang when, in approaching American harbors, the local fighter command or torpedo boats would use you for target practice. And they all were under orders that in view of the fact there were no ships around the enemy, that they should fight ours. And they would take practice dummy runs on every ship that was coming in. And they were under orders to do this. It was almost enough for a ship to be coming down the fairway for the fighter command to leap into their cockpits, tie their girls' stockings, or was that another war, and go screaming off down the runway and go dummy runs on you, you know, and you'd have to hold your cap on the bridge, you see, and the funnel would go, so on. And I used to object to this rather considerably because I'd been over in the South Pacific early in the war, and it made me nervous. And I was getting reactive on the subject, you see. Not as reactive as a bunch of officers I went down to meet one day who had just come in from that area. An aircraft passed over their landed aircraft on the airport, and they were on American soil, you see, and every one of them threw himself face down on the concrete alongside of the airplane. Of course, all the people at the airport thought this was silly. which it was because it was in the wrong time and place, but it was just a reaction, you see. Well, anyway, this little Dutch corvette comes steaming up the line in Miami, and a whole squadron of American torpedo bombers say, well, that's what we're supposed to do. And they jump in their cockpits and tie their girls' stockings around their necks, or whatever it is, and go screaming down the runway, up into the sky, and start a practice run on this Dutch corvette. And, of course, they got met right in the teeth with everything the Dutch corvette Well, at least part of the Air Force had a baptism of fire. By the way, the United States government couldn't do anything about it at all. They spoke to the Dutch corvette, and the Dutch corvette said, Captain said, we have just come out of a war. Once you go running against us, you're going to get shot at. That's it. And the corvette was provided with air cover all the way up the Atlantic seaboard clear to New York to warn off torpedo bombers and things that might make runs on it. They kept it spotted much more carefully than they were looking for the Deutschland. It was dangerous. Now, their reactivity, of course, has come up to a total insistence. It's come up to a total identification of all aircraft with enemy aircraft, you see. Because the safe thing to do is not inspect. Obviously, if you sat around in enemy waters, you know, on the lookout, he sees an aircraft in the distance, and he walks back to the phone, and he picks up the phone, and he said, give me the captain's orderly. Orderly comes to the phone. He said, I'd like to speak to the captain if he isn't busy. Captain, I don't wish to disturb you, but I have spotted something up in the sky. I'm not sure what it is. Would you like to come out and have a look? The captain says, well, when I finish a cup of tea here, I'll be up. Of course, they would have been dead by that time. Never would have had a chance. So instead of that, they jam time. You get the idea? And the jam of the time finally results in a no inspection. See what happened? So any aircraft in the distance gets shot at until I think I was the first one across the Pacific after the declaration of war, World War II, in an unarmed merchantman. And we were running like a hare before the wolves. And one day, there was a terrible alarm, and we'd managed to haul some anti-tank guns out of the hold and mount them in sandbags. And I don't know what they could have done, but it was very interesting anyway and kept the morale up. And we had a couple of Lewis guns that I'd put in action. Nobody on board knew how to operate the things. And it was quite good. And all of a sudden there was a tremendous screaming rush up on the boat deck. And everybody was gesticulating at the sky, and a Lewis gun goes off with a low snarl, and anti-tank guns start banging. So I went up to find out what was happening, and they point up at the sky, and the bridge, meantime, is madly trying to communicate with the boat deck. Out of communication, totally. Nobody'd listened to the bridge. And finally I spot this thing. I couldn't figure out what they were shooting at. They knew they were shooting at an enemy aircraft, and they'd seen it circle, and it was circling. The only difficulty was, in the tropics, Venus is totally visible in daylight. And they were shooting madly at the planet Venus. And the bridge had already figured out what they were doing and was trying to tell them madly that that was Venus. Being seamen, they had their own goddesses. Here was a totally reactive situation. Of course, the safe thing to do was shoot, obviously. Well, that's how far off it can go. So one day, this part of the reactive mind, which has been trying to keep a doll surviving on the galaxy gee whizzes from being destroyed by guerrillas, gets a whiff of a fur coat and goes into total action. Takes over right out of that moment. You've got an emergency situation. Instantly, you've got guerrillas in the vicinity. And it's better not to inspect even. People who turn around and really inspect things are very often amongst the wounded and dead. So, what are you going to do? It means that when you speed up things in the universe to too great a degree, on the false basis that you are prone to non-survival, but in the interest of keeping something surviving, you are then going to run into this timeless reactivity of action without inspection. Infinite dedications to the survival of forms and patterns. This is why goals SOP works so beautifully. And why when you start to take goals off somebody, they start nulling. You think offhand, well, gee whiz, I'm taking all this fellow's goals away from him, see? Or something of that sort. We're auditing the wrong target. You're auditing the guy. Now, of course, you're actually auditing toward the guy in order to free him up from reactivity. So your auditing target is the reactive mind. That is your auditing target, not the PC. And as long as you go on busily auditing a Thetan called a PC exclusively as the thing which monitors what you're doing, you're going to continue to make mistakes, not clear people, that's all. Because you never look at what's wrong with him. You're only auditing what he knows. The only thing wrong with him is what he doesn't know. And what he doesn't know is totally contained in the reactive mind, and there is no inspection involved. So he can't see what is wrong with him. And if he could see what was wrong with him, it wouldn't be wrong, would it? All right, a lot of things stem out of this. First and foremost, you think that a reaction, probably, to your question may take place in the next several minutes. You sit and look at an e-meter and wait for it to react. And of course, the reaction which you have to wait for is something the PC knows. And the reaction which you get instantly is in the reactive mind. And it'll occur in something on the order of a tenth or even 100th of a second. It starts to occur instantly that you enunciate it, because you're more in control and more able to re-stimulate the reactive mind than the Thetan whose reactive mind it is. Why? Because every time it's re-stimulated, it blanks something out. The no inspection factor arises. Well, you're not being blanked out by his reactive mind, so therefore you can think on these subjects, and he can't. Unless you have a total case duplicate between the auditor and the PC, the auditor can always see more of what is going on than the PC can. You taking a PC's adjudication, or what a PC thinks about something, as any indicator of what you ought to do at any time. And you, of course, are always going to waste auditing time, and you're always going to do the wrong thing. Inevitably and invariably, it'll be the wrong thing. If you want to do all the wrong things, then listen to the PC. Because he's under a tyrannical dictatorship known as the reactive mind, which knows best, because it now has in it all the individualities which he has tried to make survive. And all of them know best. So one of his basic goals, although he knows it's very bad for him, is to make his reactive mind survive. So even though this fellow will sit down and be audited, this is peculiar, and the peculiarity which resolves around this. He won't let you near any part of the reactive mind that ought to be audited. Because those parts are the survivals. So it dictates that he let them survive. So he'll always throw you red herring. And after you've accumulated several warehouses full of red herring, you have also wasted an enormous amount of auditing time because you've never audited anything that should have been audited on the case. And you've permitted to survive everything that should have been audited out of the case. Don't you see? You listen to the PC. You listen to the PC about what's flat, or what should be run, or what he thinks about the situation. And that's just write it over here in the loss column of auditing for you. Got nothing to do with the case. Nothing. You can almost go on the basis, if he says this is what the score is, your immediate reaction can be that is certainly what it isn't. Aside from this basis of goals and checks against the E-meter. Now the E-meter can read the case. Why? Because everything that is surviving madly to be computed and go into action without inspection, even though it doesn't apply anymore, you see, things like this can go into action. If you go around and inspect things and turn around and look when you're running from a stricken field, you normally get spared. So therefore, it's very, very bad to look at the things that are pursuing you. So you mustn't look at the things which are pursuing you. So you had better prevent the auditor from equally getting in danger by looking at the things that are pursuing you. Something of that sort comes up. There are all sorts of crisscross computations involved in it. But you're going on avoiding what is wrong with the PC quite unintentionally. What's wrong with him registers on the meter, but not on the person. It'll register on him secondarily. Now you can actually get something to register on the meter, which then the person finds out about. And then you get another reaction on the machine. Have you seen this happen? You say gooseberries, and the machine says tick, and then you get a surge of some kind or another. What's that all about? Well, the tick, you found it in the reactive mind. The surge, the PC found out about it. Well, you go on assessing for surges and running surges. And of course, you're just going on auditing what's already known. See, you're just wasting time. Now, if the PC doesn't find out about it after the tick, you better audit it. Got it? Now, there's another thing which makes this difficult and which has obscured your clear view of it. And that is just this one little terrible factor. Withholdingness is important in auditing today because it happens to be the comm bridge between the reactive mind and the PC. And when a withhold comes out of the reactive mind, the PC momentarily, or rather continuously, withholds too. In other words, he does what the reactive mind tells him to do. So therefore, the reactive mind is withholding something. It comes to the surface, the PC will instantly withhold it. So you ask somebody, have you ever stolen any chickens? And the thing goes, tick, only you didn't really see the first tick to amount to anything. And then it goes, wham. And then you say, well, did you ever steal any chickens? And it now goes wham, and will continue going wham. He's now under orders from the reactive mind to withhold. Well, now, withholdingness is part and parcel of survival. All agencies of the law, everybody else, dramatize this rather astonishing fact. What is the fellow doing when he is trying to protect himself by running from a stricken field? He is withholding a body from the enemy, isn't he? He's withholding a form. Now, the withhold of the form, the withhold of the form, the withhold of the form from destruction, don't you see, is a non-duplication. You kill somebody, they're dead, but the form you've got isn't dead, so therefore you have to withhold the form you've got from duplicating the form that is dead, don't you see? So similarly, somebody threatens to kill you, you are very likely to threaten to kill them, duplication is quite active, you see. But if somebody tried to kill you and you killed them, during that whole period of your killing them, you'd have to hold your form from being killed. You see this? Which, of course, sets the mechanics going for survival. And that actually is prior to the actual idea of surviving, is withholding a form. Or you could say surviving is coincident with it, whichever way you want to figure it out. But withholding a form and surviving are blood brothers. So withhold a form, you find the PC then withholding thought. And the common denominator of the actions of the reactive mind are withhold, which we see as only one, chronic individuation. They're just factors that we've added up through Scientology, all of which amount to withholding oneself, withholding one's thoughts, withholding one's actions. And all of these things add up. Why? Because they're a dictate from the matter of survival, and they're probably prior to survival, and with survival, and after survival. And there's that little comm bridge. And the comm bridge between the reactive mind and the PC is withhold. So what the reactive mind is withholding, if you click it, the PC now withholds. He dramatizes the reactive mind. When he decides to give this up, he has conquered the reactive mind to that degree, in that he's not following its orders. He ceases to be controlled by the reactive mind and starts to be controlled by a living being. So therefore, he feels better when he gets withholds off. This is the mechanics of it, don't you see? Because the withholds add up to keeping him separated from the human race. And when he gets the withhold off, he rejoins it to that degree. See how it stacks up? So the PC can always be counted upon to dramatize the withhold after it's been dredged out of the reactive mind. Even for an instant. If only for an instant, he'll still dramatize it. So you get a click, and then you get a fall. And if you're not being terribly observant, you will see only the hard, large fall. That's when the PC knew about it, don't you see? Actually, the click was there instantly. But now the PC knows about it. Wow. The secondary action is not to get the withhold off the PC, but keep the PC from dramatizing his reactive mind. So we say, what was that? And if he doesn't tell us, why, he just is going on dramatizing this withhold it, and eventually he says, well, maybe I'll take a very adventurous step and not do what I am always told to do, and I will tell this auditor what it is, and pow, then it goes clean on the meter. So at the state of withhold, you've got a PC who is reactive. The PC himself, as an analytical being, is being reactive. But that is the crossroads, and that's the only point where he is being. You got that? Otherwise, he's talking to you fairly straight, or at the dictates of the reactive mind. Early in a case particularly, if you kept on auditing the PC, you would be something like auditing a light bulb because you wanted to fix the generators in a power station. Now you can go on auditing this light bulb, and it'll blink and flicker, and you'll say, gee, look what all I'm doing. And then all of a sudden there's a horrendous crash someplace, and it goes out, and you say, well, I failed. Well, naturally you're going to fail. You're auditing a light bulb, and you're trying to fix the generators in the main power plant. Well, the thing to do is to go down to the main power plant and fix the generators. And this tells you the name and address not only of the power plant, but it also tells you very distinctly which generator, and it tells you every part on the generator and its means of propulsion. As long as you fly with your E-meter flat, you're all right. And if you start flying with the PC flat, you're just going on auditing light bulbs. So it's just going to take forever to clear somebody, that's all. I'll give you an example. Now, all of this is highly theoretical up to this point, but let me give you a very practical example. Now, we're running this pre-half scale assessment. All right?
I'll show you how to waste time in audit. See, real good. This is the way you can burn it up and audit those light bulbs, and everything is wonderful, see? And you say, well, do you have faith in things? Thank you. You get how much time that consumes. Just watching the E-meter, just watching the E-meter, watching the E-meter. What are you looking for? Are you waiting for it to play Dixie? Because there isn't anything else going to happen. No. You look here at your list, and you see faith. You don't say faith. You take your eyeballs and you fix them on the needle. Very closely, because it's going to happen fast. And you say, not is the square root of the common denominator of the differential faith. You know, waste all that time. You say, now I'm going to say some lines here, some levels, and maybe ask you some questions about them, and you don't have to answer me. You don't have to say a thing. Just sit there and be comfortable. All right, that's fine. Thank you very much. Now we're going ahead with this assessment. Okay. Faith. Cause. No effect. Effect. Obsessive can't have. Create. Think. Peculiar interest. Now look, if you're sitting here doing this, faith. Well, you remind me of a small boy the day after the race waiting for the horses to go by. It's not only that. I'm not talking to you just about missing the flick on the needle. I'm talking to you about expecting a significant flick on the needle after you've asked the thing a half a second later. If there's not going to be any flick on the needle, there is. Now, you're going to see this kind of a thing occasionally. There's a flick on the needle, and then, clong, there's a drop. Well, the flick on the needle is the reactivity. That's what you're looking for. So there's a clong. Okay, in a Joburg security check, you better say, what was that? Because you've got another activity going now. You're not doing an assessment by the Joburg. You've got that. Have you ever stolen chickens? And you ask them, have you ever stolen chickens? And nothing happens. And you say, well, okay, have you ever stolen chickens? You suspected maybe there was a flick there the first time. Maybe it was, couldn't see it, maybe. You ask him the second time, you get click, and then surge. And you say, what was that? He knows about it now. The click surge routine has put it from the reactivity into the analytical sphere. Now, to keep the PC himself from dramatizing reactivity, you've got to get him to tell it to you. But it hasn't anything to do with the assessment of the question as whether or not the question's hot. Now, you get something that's actively being withheld from you, and it doesn't wait after you say, what was that, to go click again. You say, have you ever stolen any chickens? Wham! 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 You say, brother, you better tell me about that. Of course, you were actually assuming that by this time he knows about it. Well, really, he does. Of course, I conduct security checks much differently than you do. You're very happy to go along and buy garbage. You ask a guy a question, you say to him, have you ever raped any chickens? And whatever the question is, and he says, well, you notice there's a flick on the meter, and all of a sudden it does a surge. You say, what was that? He knows by now, the surge says he does. You're no longer assessing the reactivity of the question. Now you're assessing the knowingness of the PC, but you've got to get it off. It's another operation. Now that you've got it out of the reactive mind to him, now you've got to get it from him to you. So you say, what was that? And he says, well, I remember my father killing chickens when I was a little boy. And you say, all right. All right, you say. Have you ever raped any chickens? Now, I don't say that. That's your notion. I believe these things. I believe these meters, see? I used them long enough to be made very, very tame by the whole thing. You know, I know what you're saying, what it says. So I say, well, did you ever rape any chickens? Click. Boom. I say, what was that? And he says, well, my father used to kill a lot of chickens. I say, no, I say, you didn't hear the question. Did you ever rape any chickens? Oh, well, he says, yes, you put it that way. Yes, I used to when I was a little boy. You don't do it that way. You haven't been doing it that way at all. You say, you ever rape any chickens? He said, my father killed some chickens one time. Well, good. Did you ever rape any chickens? The meter falls, and you say, well, what was that? And he says, well, I was just thinking about chickens hanging up in the market. And that was what that was. In other words, you keep buying this. You get the idea? You're actually building the PC's belief up that he can withhold things from you. So I say very meanly, I don't necessarily advise you to do this because you can get into a lot of trouble this way. You've got to have terrific control of a PC in order to do this kind of thing. He's really got to be grooved in, otherwise you create ARC breaks and the rest of the session is all messed up and you get nothing done any place, anywhere, at any time. So that's your adjudicative idea. How much control have you got of this PC and how much control have you got of the session? And if your control is terrific, and your ARC with the PC is very good, and the PC knows what you're trying to do, and he knows he can't fool you, you eventually get a security check going like this. You've started in this way. You've said, well, did you ever rape any chickens? And he says, well, no, my father killed some once, and, well, I saw a dog jump on a chicken the next time you ask him, you know, you ever kill any chickens? And he says, well, no, did you ever rape any chickens? And, well, I don't know. Yes, I remember something about chickens. A little boy's talking about chickens one time. And you say, good, fine. Good, did you ever rape any chickens? And he says, well, I thought about it once. And you say, good, thank you, fine. Your meter's falling. You're just wasting time. Well, if you're real good, you don't go at it that way at all. You say, did you ever rape any chickens? And you get a click, fall, surge. And you say, what was that? And he says, well, I was just thinking about, father used to kill some chickens. You say, no. I ask you, did you ever rape any chickens? Well, actually, my little sister, no, come on. Did you ever rape any chickens? That's what I'm trying to find out here. He said, yes, I used to when I was a little boy. You say, good. Did you ever rape any chickens? All right, it's clear now. Good. Next question. Get the idea? He all of a sudden has got the horrifying notion that you just aren't going to buy Dodges, that's all. Coo! He's met a Tartar. And the reactive mind after that is no longer as powerful. The reactive mind says, protect it. It says it's a withhold. It's valuable. You're in danger. Give him an equivocation. Got the idea? Feed him some muck over here. Throw him a red herring and protect me. And so I just say, it says here that rape of chickens, I think even Susie has heard me say questions like this. It says here that rape of chickens has occurred. Now, supposing you tell me about it, huh? Yes. That's the end of that security question. You got the idea? So it goes off, boom. Question, bang, question, bang, question, bang. You see? Get the idea? You ask the question, see the fall, you notice there's a secondary surge, now you do the other thing, say, tell me. The reactive mind says, under no circumstances, tell him withhold, and I say, all right, but you can tell me. And all of a sudden the PC said, he believes in me one way or the other, and I'll tell him right here, right now. Bang, and he tells you, and he appears, and you ask the question again just to make sure, and then you ask the next question, and you're sailing, you understand? Goals, you don't ask a goal. I want to pick gooseberries. This is the goal that you're checking. You come down the line, you find this thing, and you say, well, now I'm going to ask you about a goal here. You already run through 200 goals. See? I'm going to ask you about a goal here, and I don't want you to think I'm terribly personal, but I want to know if this goal is still active. The goal is all right if I read it to you. All right. Okay. Well, I'm going to read it to you now. You want to pick gooseberries. How's that? Now let's see. Now let's see what it's saying over here on the meter. Boy, that's the way to burn auditing time, man. You're going down the list. No preliminaries, no nothing. You just say, I want to pick gooseberries. I want to ride horses. Got the idea? You got the list over here. You got the meter in front of you. What you really do is you look at the goals list. It says, I want to pick gooseberries. You don't read it there. You delay your own read of it. You look over here at the meter, and you say, I want to pick gooseberries. And it goes, flamp. You say, good, I want to pick gooseberries. Flamp. Good. I want to pick gooseberries. Going more now. You say, good, thank you. Mark it here. 2 divisions. Go to the next goal. I want to ride horses. Nothing there. I want to ride horses. Nothing there. Oh. Next goal. Got the idea? If you watch me doing this stuff, you'd think you were looking at a sausage grinder. You just chew right up, see? Right on down the line. Well, the longer you suppose that a PC is going to be adjudicative about it, or its adjudicativity proves only that he reacts according to the dictates of a tyrant known as the reactive mind in order to protect and not disclose the valences and other activities which exist without his inspection so that he, as a form, can survive. And it doesn't work out. You can't go at it that way at all. No, I talk with the E-meter about the fellow's circuits, and if he wants to chip in once in a while, that's all right with me. That's okay. I won't chop him. He'll say, well, I just remembered something. I just remembered about riding a horse across the field as a little boy, and the horse picked up a stone, and I say, well, here we go. And I say, gee, is that so? Thank you. And first he begins to believe I couldn't possibly be auditing him. Well, I'm not. I'm finding out what's holding the show up here. I'm finding out what he's reacting to. I'm finding out what is there to react in terms of matter, energy, space, time, and thoughts, which are all crisscrossed in one way or the other and suspended in time, so that the thought 2 billion years old is still being violently thought in this person's mind. Why? This person is perfectly capable of inspecting. This person can't do otherwise than survive. This person is capable of being totally able. This person can get the show on the road. This person can actually make forms survive. But because he's got all these dependent mechanisms and gewgaws and things of this character and reactive mind to help him out and pat him on the back and make it unnecessary, he acts like a nut and he destroys everything he lays his hands on. Once he thinks about time, you straighten it out. Well, all right, it's easy to straighten it out. All you have to do is validate the PC. That's for sure. After you cut him to ribbons, well, I look up and say, well, you're doing all right. Thank you very much. You know? But you can saw into these assessments with a whir and a clank, with your eye pinned right there to the needle, and away you go. And you go right on down the line. Bangity, 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 bang. It's like telegraph poles passing by when you're riding in a train, you know? And it isn't. Well, here we are. Well, isn't this unusual? Now I'm going to consult with you all about your reactive mind. Now, what do you think you possibly might be having to run now? What do you think that might be? You're talking to the wrong telephone line. You've got it hooked into the wrong... You might have it in the right switchboard, but you sure got it in the wrong corner of the building. Now, there's an example in this bulletin of an assessment that could have been bought merely because the PC believed it and you were getting cognition curves, surges off of it. See, it could have been bought. I didn't say the auditor would have bought it or anything of the sort. But there was another one that was alive. And these were order, command, and conquer. And that conquer was alive, man. And that's what I was looking for on the case. I said, we've missed something here someplace. Somewhere along the line, we have missed one. That's why I wanted to assess the case. And this person was perfectly agreeable and knew completely that it was order or command. But these were the little red tabs that were hanging out. And they cleared up. And it was one the PC didn't mention. Now, the PC did report, because he's in pretty good shape, as I was doing the assessment, which I was still taking just the E-meter, he said, I just keep thinking about control. I keep thinking about control. I said, that's fine. That's fine. That's cooperative data. You're being helped by the PC. But I bought the E-meter. I went over everything and settled everything down, and it was control. So I bought it. You got the idea? I didn't buy it because he said so. But he helped me out by saying that. He could just as easily have been throwing a great big red herring across the path, too. He might have said, sort of down deep someplace, the one thing I don't want to have anything to do with is failed importance. See, the reactivity, So he just as likely he would have said, well, it's connect. I'm sure it's connect. Got the idea? If I can just tell him convincingly enough that it's connect. You don't find PCs doing this when they're in better condition. But when they're in worse condition, they will do this continually. It's connect. It obviously is connect. He's trying desperately, reactively, not to get anywhere near failed importance. When a PC starts getting too insistent that it is something, and is practically screaming that it is something, I know very well what's happening. The mechanics and all of the various little wheels and so forth that are going around are adding up just this. There is something here that we had better not put our number 10s in because it's quicksand and it'll go straight through. Somebody tells me, well, I don't want to run this level anymore. This level is boring and I don't want anything more to do with this level and all of that kind of thing. I say, how interesting. Isn't that fascinating? Of course, perfectly reasonable about it. I don't get militant on the subject. I say, has a PC got a withhold? Which is very likely running these things these days. As I've told you, the withhold is the bridge between the reactive mind and the analytical mind. So, of course, PC picks up a withhold. Half an hour later, you find the PC with an ARC break. That's, by the way it goes. They get the withhold on the auditor, and the auditor misses it, and then they'll pick up an ARC break, and then the auditor will try to cure up the ARC break when in fact it's this withhold back here half an hour earlier. All ARC breaks, by the way, for your information, usually occur a half an hour before they're expressed by the PC. If you're sharp, you can always see that an ARC break has occurred, but earlier than that, if you're very sharp, you can see that a withhold occurs, and you just bust into your auditing command and say, now, how are you doing? How's it going? How's it going now? All right, haven't got any ARC breaks. You're not looking for an ARC break, see? Withholding anything. Clang. You say, what was that? Well, I haven't answered the auditing question for 10 commands. Oh, you say, all right, give me 10 answers. You don't necessarily say that, but you sure as hell could. And I've been known to do things like that. Anyhow, what you're trying to do is keep the PC from being fooled about himself. And if you are in a continuous, consecutive, forever and ever avoidance of the reactive mind, you're just Q&Aing with the PC. You'll eventually wind up doing something like this. And this is the me plus ultra of Q&A. You're doing a jailbreak. All right, you say, now, have you ever thrown any rings around chimneys? And the PC says, you've gotten your click and then your surge. See, very often on an assessment, you get a good read, which then disappears. Well, actually, it was just the cognition surge. When the energy released, that was withholding it from the PC, and the PC found out about it, and so on. Of course, you get a needle response. But it's usually after the fact of the needle reaction on the reactive mind. That after the fact is the PC finding out. Right? So these latent surges that you get on the E-meter are analytical, ordinarily. All right. He says, well, yes. Yes. I've thrown some rings around chimneys. I threw a ring around a chimney when I was a little girl. I did that, and my grandmother was very cross with me about it. I'm showing you a Q&A now, see? And you say, good. Why exactly was your grandmother cross with you? He said, well, I'd been very bad, and I treated my grandmother very badly, or something like this. And the auditor says, well, just where was that? Where did you live at the time? What the hell does this have to do with the Joburg, see? It's got nothing to do with the Joburg. It's trying to run an incident with using the excuse of the Joburg. The Joburg is totally dedicated to withholds, and that's everything it's dedicated to, and there isn't anything else it's dedicated to. And you want to know if he threw any rings around chimneys. And he finally, you said, you throw any ring around chimneys? You get a clink. Surge. You say, what was that? And he says, well, matter of fact, I did. I did. I did, yes. I just remembered. I did. I threw some rings around chimneys, little boy. You say, good. Throw any other rings around chimneys? Clang. You say, good. Well, what was that? Well, when I was a young man, I used to do it all the time. You say, good. Now, did you ever throw any rings around chimneys? Clink. Just a little clink on it that time, and then a surge. And you say, what was that? And he says, well, I actually didn't mean to get down to this, but every night about midnight I have to go up and throw a ring around the chimney. And that's it. And you say, all right, thank you very much. Good. Now, did you ever throw any rings around chimneys? Dead or no mackerel? Next question. You're just interested in withholds. You're just interested in that question. Now you'll get some oddball ramifications on questions. You get some oddball ones where he's got everything connected with everything connected with everything. You understand? If you don't get any instantaneous response, you're not getting a response on that question. Why are you fooling with the question? Now the order is clear the E-meter. Well, what is the E-meter, and what is the E-meter doing that you must clear? Well, the E-meter is responding. What is the E-meter responding on? The E-meter is responding on a reactivity. If you haven't got a reactivity, to hell with it. Because the second time you ask the question, if the PC now knows it analytically, you'll have it reactive anyhow. It'll be an instant read. If you're not getting instant reads or something, the PC is dawdling around and walking over the hills and so forth. Of course, I will go ahead and clean up a meter on a question rather thoroughly, but it isn't necessarily falling on the question if you're all getting latent surge all the time. You said, you ever throw your ring around chimneys? And 2, and 3, and 4, and 5, and 6, and 7, and 8, and 9, and surge. You say, what was that? Well, I don't know. It's going to escape my mind now. Oh, this is not the time to say, what has escaped your mind? Did your grandmother spank you that day? What was the color of your brother's hair? No, it's not time. Time to say that is the original question. It turned on some kind of a response after a while, so that's the original question. Whatever it was. You ever done any illicit diamond buying? And watch that meter. And if it doesn't go snap, it isn't falling on that. In other words, your E-meter actions are as instantaneous as the reactive mind is batty. You got it? They're fast. See? They're right now. Of course, if you get any kind of a fall, of any kind whatsoever, even a latent fall, you had better find out what it is by asking, what was that? But that is pursued by asking the question again. And if you don't get a fall on the question, why are you interested in the latent fall? You can go ahead and clear it up if you want to. It's a good workmanlike job if you do, but that isn't necessarily what's going on here at all, or something else going on someplace. Well, you're doing the thing of trying to read the question to the PC, and then trying to clear the rest of the security check as a sideline. It clears one question at a time, and if it doesn't fall on that question, it doesn't fall on the question. When is the fall going to occur on that question? Well, it might not occur on your first read, but that's beside the point. It'll certainly occur instantly on your second read. Instantaneous, within 1/10 of a second of your having uttered the question, there will be a reaction on the meter. And if there's not a reaction on the meter, but a latent reaction that is finally going long after several seconds or something like this, yeah, the PC is withholding something of some kind or another about something. But look at here, it's not necessarily on that question at all. That's the mistake you're making, you see. You can actually read a Joburg off, brrr, right on down through all 10 pages, you see, and take instantaneous falls. Clang! What was that? Yes, I did. You say, good. Thank you. Repeat the question. No reaction. Now, if you sat there and waited for the E-meter to play Dixie, you might get a fall on almost anything, see? You might get a fall on the fact that he was getting bored, that he was getting tired, that he hopes he doesn't find out. He knows the Joburg. He's had it about 4 times. And he knows there's a question coming right up on the next page that is hotter than a pistol, and he's guilty as sin. Actually, he's never thought of it before, but it just suddenly occurred to him that it wasn't quite the right thing to do to hit his father and mother in the head with an axe. And it's just occurred to him like a flash of lightning on the head. And the question that has to do with this is on the next page. So hey, you've read the question. Now the PC gets to worrying about the next page, and you get an answer in the meter here, which is reading the surge of the PC. You got the idea? It isn't on that question. The law is if you don't get an instantaneous reaction on the meter, there's something wrong with the question. It isn't the answer to that question. If you get any kind of a reaction on the meter at all, you ask the question again, of course. If you don't get a reaction on the second time, it still isn't it. Don't sit there and wait for it to play Dixie. You don't have to hang around on the street corners leaning up against the lamppost hoping something is going to happen. The town you're operating in isn't that one horse. You want things to happen in Auditon, do them rapidly so that you do get something happening. And you'll get something happening with speed. So your assessments do not take in the zone and area of the PC's analytical mind unless, of course, the PC is being very resistive. Now, he's being very resistive about a withhold. Well, that's between you and the PC. You got the idea. That's another operation. It has nothing to do with finding it on the meter or anything of the sort. It's still on the meter. You found it. Now it is reacting on the PC. Well, you just say, stand and deliver. What is it? And you could go on and clear 89 other questions with the PC of one character or another, but it isn't falling on the one you're asking. You got the idea? So clear what you're doing. Now, similarly on an assessment, it requires no cooperation on the part of the PC at all. Actually, the PC could be walking around the room if he could do that and hold on to the electrodes, and you're speaking loud enough. The PC would hear reactively what you were saying because it's dangerous, and you get a reaction on the meter. And you think you have to wait for the PC to think about it or the PC to rationalize about it. That's not true. You don't want anything to do with that. It's a very happy fact that he can still think. We're glad he's still alive. Cheerio. But that's about all it has anything to do with it. Nothing else has anything to do with it. All right, I've given you a very long lecture today, as I am prone to do, and should start them earlier on Fridays. But I've been studying for some time why it takes so long for something to happen. And I've now done enough observation that I can tell you that it isn't a slight thing of speeding you up so that your actions are more coordinated or something. It's gross. You're auditing the wrong target. You're auditing the PC's analytical sphere of action. And that isn't what you should be auditing at all. You're supposed to be auditing the reactive sphere. As long as you're auditing the reactive sphere, it shows up only on the meter, and it shows up instantaneously, and that's what you bite. Right away. Pang! And you get the job done. Now, I'm not asking you to rush. I don't care how leisurely you go about the job of auditing, but just audit the right target, which is the reactive bank of the PC, Dynamics, Modern Science, and Mental Health, published May 9th, 1950. Thank you. Thank you. Well, so thank you for giving me an opportunity to have a little rest and relaxation. You know what most people consider work, I don't. When I get cases running off the rails, far off on administrative lines, trying to prove conclusively that the organization cannot possibly survive, it seems an awful long way to have to audit. That's just about what it amounts to. Somebody presents me with the fait accompli of auditing is absolutely vital and necessary 12,000 miles away or 8,000 miles away. That's generally what administrative things break down to, by the way. People do odd things to you. They present you with emergencies, enormous emergencies. And they think I don't know yet that they're just trying to reach me. That's their idea of reaching people. If I appeared on the ground, it would be very, very simple to straighten out the thing. It's almost the heroic effort necessary to keep things running wrong. It's almost fantastic. It's almost fantastic. I just think the people in these governments just absolutely must be just sweating blood day and night. I mean, how can they manage it, you know? I can see them up now at 10 Downing Street in the State Department, 1700 and something, Pennsylvania Avenue. I can just see those poor fellows, you know, trying to hold things in disorder. Because you'd be surprised the ease with which things will snap into order. It isn't an automaticity particularly, but order is always easier to achieve than disorder. You have to work at disorder. And yet the world at large is so in disagreement with this principle. But I wrote a story one time about a fellow who went ashore trying to sin under a hellfire and brimstone captain, and he went ashore in China trying to sin. And the captain given him a big lecture about the ease it was, you know, to drift into the ways of wrong. You know, and how easy this was and how simple this was for a young man to have all this happen, you know. And the fellow goes ashore and he just overtly, you see, tries desperately to get into some trouble or have some excitement, you see, and it's all a complete flop. Yeah. Well, what is this? This is Junio the 12th? 12th. 61. All right. If any student has any question he cannot live without being answered, speak up. You mean all of your questions have been answered?
No. They aren't coming up till I start auditing.
What was that again? Got one coming up?
I said mine are going to come up when I start auditing.
Oh, I see. All right. Yes, Mike?
I don't know if it's off the point, but one of the questions we were asked was PhD. I have no idea what that is. It's PhD.
You don't know what PhD is? Well, now, let's see. Who is here who Mary Sue gave the very adequate demonstration of that? All right. Madge, would you be good enough to show him how conclusively You can demonstrate that a cat has PDH'd him. Will you do that for him? I'll tell you all about it. That's the easiest one. That's easier to demonstrate than talk about. Nobody would believe it until they say it. You see, everybody has been PDH'd, according to the meter, if you don't know how to ask questions. It's a wonderful example in how to get wrong information. I want to repeat something, speaking about a meter, just mentioning it in passing. Now, are you having better luck using instant read than latent read?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Is there anybody still in a flat one about this? Whether you use, yes?
I have a problem, Ron. When the PC answers, say, is it all right to audit in this room? You don't get any motion on the meter. Then the PC says no or yes, and then we'll say he says yes, and then you get a drop after he says yes. This is the latent read that you're referring to?
That's a latent read. That is a latent read. A meter reading on the PC's reply or response is a latent read.
Do you exploit it?
Hmm?
Do you exploit this one? Try to find out what it is.
Brother, I dropped that one so hard it goes plop. You know, I just pay no attention to it.
Okay.
There's no attention to it. He didn't know from nothing. Your meter knew. So he says it isn't all right. Now, I won't act on it. But I'm still in two-way communication with the PC. You see, it's a code break not to be. So I handle this thing two ways. One, I'm not going to handle it. And two, I make the PC feel all right about it. I usually handle these things somewhat in this order. Is it all right to audit in this room? PC, long, calm lag, looks around. Nothing's happening, you know. Meter dead calm. At the instant I ask the question, PC says, no, I'm not so sure. And I say, well, we'll probably get more used to it as we go on. Thank you. It doesn't create an ARC break. The PC kind of perks up and says, well, all right, you're going to be overbearing. Now, this latent read is licking a lot of organizations right now, and a lot of auditors in the field. It's licking them. They don't dig this one. And their security checks are going up toward the 100-hour mark. We had been very successful in handling people in Johannesburg in the course, and we had a terrific course, and it was fine. And when Peter Williams went back down to Australia, he was utterly stunned at the length of time it was going to take to do anything in the way of an assessment or security check or anything else. Now, this was the dog datum that had slid in unnoticed. It had just crept in under the door. Everybody was reading latent reads. See, that was the difference. Nobody was getting the show on the road, and he hadn't actually noticed this essential fact. I didn't notice it myself until I'd been sitting around here for about a month watching what you were doing, and it suddenly occurred to me, you're doing something wrong, but I can't put my finger on it. And Mary Sue, in watching what you were doing and in giving checks and that sort of thing and trying to demonstrate it, suddenly came up with the datum. She said, auditors are reading an e-meter that falls after the fact. She didn't say it that precisely, but that was it. She had a lot of other things to say about it. But this is the way this thing goes, you see. If you don't get a response on the e-meter within something on the order of 1/10 of a second of your question, everything thereafter is a no response. You got it? It's a no response now. We don't care if it whistles Dixie. It's a no response. In the first place, you are not auditing the analytical mind. And if all that was wrong with people was the analytical mind, then you'd have it made, you see. Because a guy could think his way straight so fast it'd make his head swim. He is responding to the reactivity of the reactive mind, and therefore all the auditor is interested in is the reactive mind. And the only thing which responds instantly on the meter is the reactive mind, that's all. Anything else, his blood pressure's responding, or his sudden memory that he didn't put out the cat, oh my God, and there's the cat home all day in the apartment. This kind of thing, you see, gets in. Now, we have another order of read of this character, and these two things are similar. We have to give this other one a name now. We got several orders of magnitude of read that are really high school E-meter reading. One of those is the rise. You don't pay any attention to a rise. Now, we have some new students here, and I'm very happy with you, and you're all welcome, and nobody is going to be cross with you. We'll try to teach you everything we know how to teach you until you report to us that somebody's needle rose. Why don't you report that there is air on Earth, or some other astonishing fact? Why not send a telegram to the Prime Minister concerning the fact that farms in Sussex are covered with dirt? I mean, it's just the same thing. So it rose. Well, why do you ignore this phenomenon of a rising needle and say nothing about it? You cannot establish what started it arising because the pre-clear did not observe what it was started it rising, and you might have had 5 words in your sentence, and any one of them may have started it rising, or the fact that a bee just buzzed past the window could start it rising. It's anything the PC would be unwilling to confront. But to establish what it was would require perhaps 15 minutes to a half an hour's search of going over every possible element, all to what event, to find out that the PC can't confront. Well, man, everybody knows that. If he could confront everything, he wouldn't in the least bit be having any trouble in existence anywhere at all. So all the rising needle has said that the PC is not clear. And you know that, and I know that, so why should we research it? See? What triggers the rise of a needle? And there's some old nursery rhymes and so forth that go along with this thing that I don't remember very well, but they have a I think there's some character by the name of Chaucer wrote one about it. So what? I mean, you're not announcing a knowable factor. You're announcing an unknowable factor, so there's no point in it. Now, what stops a needle from rising, you can establish. This fellow is able to confront cats, and something, Lord knows what, an electronic circuit going off at the North Pole causing a difference in the variation of the intensity of Earth, could start a needle rising. So what? He can confront cats, so we say to him cats, and the needle stops rising. And we stop saying cats, the needle keeps on rising. So we know cat stops the needle. Now similarly, in giving a security check, if you ask a question and the fellow has a rising needle, you're not reading the rising needle, you're reading a change of characteristic. And you ask him, have you ever illicitly diamond bought? You say, and the needle stops. Ah, but that's a change of characteristic. It didn't fall, it didn't theta bop, it didn't rock slam. But if you got an instant read on did you ever illicit diamonds bought, you press it. You see, the instant read is instantly it stops. It's just for a second, see? It's going up very nicely, and all of a sudden you say, did you ever illicitly diamond bought? Man, that's a change characteristic. Get you jackrabbit ears flapping. That means he has illicitly diamonds bought at some time or another. Probably in this lifetime, probably got it in his pocket right now. But you'll find a PC who is having a very rough time, who reads on a very, very high sensitivity knob here, will very often just rise and 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 rise, and up goes the needle, and you just ask them security checks, and you know that they've done practically every question in the security check. They have a major crime on for which they're being looked for by Interpol, see? And you sit there in fascinated amazement. Irresponsibility on all dynamics is so low that they have no reality on an overt or a withhold. So you, of course, get no needle reaction of any kind whatsoever, because the individual must to some degree connect with the reactive mind to spark it off, you see. There must be a connection between the individual and that area of the reactive mind. That's why you can't take somebody who has a bad neck and all of a sudden say, well, I'm going to cure your bad neck, and you work on him for days, and then you happen accidentally to ask the question of how's your neck? And he said, how would I know? And you say, well, isn't your bad neck getting any better? He said, well, it's never been bad. See, his head's always over this way, you see. It's never been bad. There's nothing wrong with my neck. It's a fact. I mean, the guy has no reality on it. It's out of his reach. So you can only reach those things in the reactive mind that the individual himself is capable at that time of becoming responsible for or aware of. And the E-meter tells you what he is capable of becoming responsible for or aware of. It spots this responsibility factor for you, which gives you a reality factor. Therefore, you can audit, find, exploit things that appear on the E-meter. But you cannot audit, find, or exploit things that won't appear on the E-meter because they're beyond the zone of responsibility of the PC. Completely beyond it. If you were to go down here to Dartmoor Scrubs and fish out the warden or somebody, somebody else, and put him on the E-meter, and you say, well, have you ever beaten up any prisoners? Have you ever been mean to any prisoners? And so forth. And he'd say, no, we just do the best in this best of all possible worlds. And say, help me, look at his knuckles, you know, and they're bleeding. Well, you say, how about those knuckles bleeding? Well, what about that? Have you done anything with any prisoner lately? Oh, well, no. Fellow got in my road coming up here to see you, but... of course, he was in my road, and he shouldn't have been there, you see. It was his fault, and I didn't do anything to him at all. This becomes utterly, perfectly fascinating. There's the evidence. The evidence is right there, and the fellow has no reality on it. So don't be dismayed, because it's this responsibility factor. He's incapable of taking responsibility for the action, even potentially. The E-meter only reads on what an individual is responsible of taking the reaction for, and that's all. It'll only read on that. If he's potentially responsible for taking responsibility, if he's potentially responsible, then, and only then, you're going to get an action on the meter. So it doesn't, you see, read a catalog of crimes like an IBM machine. You know, every crime he has on the whole track between now and the beginning of track are not all cataloged and will not all fall out with certain degrees of read. If you have an idea that an E-meter is going to do that kind of thing, then disabuse yourself of it. The E-meter will eventually do it. But just as the E-meter reads the reactive mind and reads reactivity and nothing but reactivity, so it also, ergo, perforce, must read what the individual can be potentially responsible for. Therefore, when you give repetitively a security check of an individual, when you potentially have that individual capable of being responsible for certain of the crimes on the security check, he'll come up with withholds on them suddenly and mysteriously that he never came up with before. So this is an instant and immediate test of whether or not you are advancing the responsibility factor of the PC by auditing. If the PC has become more capable of taking responsibility, then and only then are you making progress in auditing. And then and only then will you get new withholds. So don't be surprised when the meter starts reacting on a security check that you just finished giving 10 hours of auditing before you finished the security check. Now you've been auditing a person, and all of a sudden he's got a whole new set of withholds. And you say, well, what a fool I am that I didn't catch these in the first place. This might be an amateur's response. Why didn't I catch all those withholds in the first place? Well, you know, the guy has to be potentially responsible for withholding on those exact things before they register. See, he doesn't even consider them an overt. And as you process a pre-clear, who is going motivator, 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 how mean they all were to me, how mean they all were to me, motivator, 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 when they're going along this line, don't be amazed that they have never done anything to anybody and that you can't find it on the e-meter that they ever have done anything to anybody, any place, ever. Don't be surprised, see? It's simply an index of the responsibility of the PC, and it's terribly bad. You process him for a little while on the pre-have scale, one way or the other, and what happens when you process him? He gains in responsibility, and as soon as his responsibility is up, any way, shape, or form, all of a sudden, it isn't motivator, motivator, motivator. The PC did something. Amazing. You don't hear about the husband beating him day and night, just standing there wearing his arm out. The PC at least comes up to the point of where, well, it must be very tiring. I must have worn the man out, and so forth. They come up that high. And eventually, after you've been auditing them for hours and hours and running general pre-have levels or SOP goals or something, you give them another security check of one kind or another, and you find the astonishing fact that the way these fights start is she usually takes a hot iron and takes his best shirt or any of his clothes and starts pressing him and then leaves the iron on, you see. And that's usually the way these fights start. Now we get it going a little further, and there's more hours of auditing, and we give a security check, and we find this astonishing development. That the person calculatedly plotted to make the husband mad. It wasn't an accident. The person has become aware of the mechanical processes and is taking responsibility for the mechanical process which make them turn an iron on and put it on a new shirt or something like that and burn straight through it. They're getting even with it. And now they will begin to wonder what's wrong with them that they're doing something like this. And there you're really seeing a case start operating. And when you don't see a case start operating, at least that much, watch out, because you're not making progress. If somebody's going motivator, 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 50 hours of processing later, motivator, 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 no good, you're not making any advance. Now, if a case, for instance, is given a security check, and then given a general run, just routine 2, and then given another security check, and you don't now find new withholds on the security check, watch it, because something happened there. You goofed. There's something wrong with that general run. The case didn't make advance. That means you're running the PC with the rudiments out. That's what it means. There's something you can do about it. Yeah, well, run through your security check on the basis of instant read, and when you get to the end of the run, just, give it a lick and a promise. Look for instant reads, that's about it. It's almost as fast as you can read a security check, by the way. You're not going to find very much on it. When you get an instant read, clear it up and go on to the next question. Get right back to auditing. And now, what is the present time problem? What is the ARC break? What external activity is the PC engaging in that is countering the auditing? Let's get real curious. You know, these great big fruit horns that they sometimes display. You know, there's one up in the monkey room, by the way. There's a monkey sitting there with a Mexican hat on with one of these horns plenty. Well, it's just like turning one of those things upside down, only the fruit squashes all over the floor. Crash. Yeah, well, outside of the fact they've been getting drunk every night before they came into auditing session, and outside of the fact they've been trying to ruin your reputation while you were auditing them, and outside of the fact that they had already had a bet with somebody that they wouldn't get any gain in processing, the case is good. The case making progress, aside from that. And it's gross. Don't look for little tiny things. It will be a gross error. All auditing errors which can suspend the case today are gross. And what do I mean by gross auditing error? Complete, stupid, stumbling, unfamiliarity with the TRs and model session and the E-meter. It really has to be bad. Next, complete and utter disregard of the rudiments. Just whole hog. Not paying any attention whatsoever to tone arm reads when the person leaves the session and tone arm reads when they come back into the session. Not even being vaguely curious about it. Assessing the pre-have scale, for instance, by only assessing the level for compete. Well, they read in the bulletin that when you assess the level on the primary scale, why then you go over into the secondary scale, and that is one level. So you just, what you do, of course, is just take every word in the secondary scale. And not only that, if a person would do that stupidly, they would also do this. Well, you just run one leg of the bracket. Like, what has your husband done to you? Thank you. What has your husband done to you? Thank you. What has your husband done to you? Thank you. Now, when you get errors of auditing adding up like that, you get no gain. But I'm telling you, you're going to learn it, you're going to get subjective reality on it just like I had. The blunders which prevent cases from advancing are so gross as to stagger you. They are so gross that you won't believe them, therefore you don't look for them. When you're training auditors or something, you just don't look in an HGC or something like that for errors this gross. You're taking it for granted that the errors are minor, that the PC had a little ARC break at the beginning of session with the auditor and therefore didn't advance in the session. That's what this is all about. No, you ask about this and you try to clean up this little ARC break and everything is all somehow or another. PC doesn't still make any gains, and you go along and you just flounder and fumble and you wonder where you're going and what you're doing. No, the error there is the auditor never shows up for sessions. You think I'm kidding, but that's the order of magnitude of error. It's big, you see. I mean, it'll be big. It'll be something on the order of, well, every night after the auditing day, the auditor has a date with the pre-clear's wife. Yeah. You take my tip. You look for gross errors. Just as we're running at 10,000 horsepower today plus, so it takes a 10,000 horsepower error to combat it. And don't you go looking when you're training auditors or supervising processing or trying to look at, don't you go around trying to find that little tiny little thing that would hold it all up. Because you're asking the same silly question as how can you put a matchstick in front of the 20th Century Limited and stop the train? Well, you can't. It has to be another 20th Century Limited. And it will be, too. But you'd be amazed. I've done some cross-checking of this character that is just stoning you. Just gone over it and over and over, trying to find out why we weren't making a gain, why we weren't making a gain. And I just got one the other day. We had an auditor, just wasn't getting good results, that's all. Wasn't getting good results. And look, what he learned about running an E-meter was the totality of running an E-meter a few days ago, and he thanked me very carefully. Look, the guy's been assessing on the pre-half scale. He has been running security checks. But he didn't know anything about setting up a meter. What he had learned is the third of a dial drop test. He learned several things about a meter. And he told me what these things were that he'd learned about a meter. He'd learned how to set up a meter. He learned to set it up, and he knew now that you read by the needle. You talk about gross error. I mean, how could the guy have gotten any gains at all running assessments when he couldn't read a meter? You get the idea? So this is as gross as the errors are, that's all. They're just horrendous. I see that you really don't probably believe me. You don't have much reality on what I'm saying there, but you will have. It's grim. You sweating your brains out. You know, the worst thing that a person who is supervising auditing can do is start inventing unusual and gargantuan solutions because the auditor he's giving them to just can't seem to make a gain on the case. So the auditor keeps coming in and saying, that didn't work. Well, actually, this is the old whizaroo on the California response. There's a thing called the California maturity test, and the California this and California that. Well, actually, in Dianetics, there was the California response. Inevitably, if you said something about a new process, when I was working out there, somebody would say, oh, yes, that's very interesting. I was using that last year. Sounds strange, you see. You said, well, there's this new scale, and they said, well, they're using it last year. They always used it last year, you see. And I listened to this for over a year before I finally got a proper response to it. And that came the California response. And that is, what were you using a year ago? Well, that's a cooker. They've even forgotten what you said, practically, see. They don't remember anything that you said, and they come out with some wild rendition, and you've just told them about the no-effect scale, you see. All right. And they say, well, yes, well, what were you using a year ago? Exactly, what was it? And they say, well, just what you're talking about. No, what exactly were you using a year ago? They say, well, we put these phonograph records on a phonograph, and we clamped the earphones on the PC, you see, and we'd say, be calm, be calm, be calm. That's what we were doing a year ago, and it was just exactly what you said. You try to get any sequitur out of this, you think? That's the way to handle those characters. Anyway, similarly, the most common failure that you have in managing several cases at the same time is this one. A person comes in and says, you know that you told me to do yesterday? And you say, yes. Well, that was your mistake right there, you see. They say, well, triumphantly, see. Well, it didn't work. And you say, well, I don't know, what is it doing? It'll give you a big rundown. You think up a new and extraordinary solution, you see, and you give them that, and they go away, and they come back the next day. They say, it didn't work. Oh, no, it didn't work. For God's sakes, get bright enough sooner or later to say to them directly and positively, what didn't work? And you inevitably get some outpouring of sewage that has nothing to do with anything you have ever been talking about. Well, I keep standing the PC on his head in the corner, and the blood keeps rushing to his head. And it's obvious that he isn't clear because he can experience a physical effect. I mean, it'll be some gross nonsense of this character. And you have been pounding your brains out trying to get this case moving, you see, thinking, putting it on automatic, that your instructions and advices were all going to be followed. And if you get that type of repetitive action, that is one of your gross errors that you must be alert to, that you must wake up to. Listen, if you figured out a case from A to Izzard, knowing Scientology, and you ask somebody to run this on the case, I'll promise you something is going to happen. It isn't going to be, well, it didn't work. So obviously it's a gross error. You keep looking for something that works on the PC when the first order or instruction you gave, which is take the PC up to the auditing room, hasn't been followed yet. I'm not getting 1-5 on the subject of auditors. I'm talking about auditing failures. And auditing failures always stem from gross, very gross errors. And they're so gross that you will overlook them. And when you start getting extraordinary solutions on top of these gross auditing errors, of course you're just getting no place at a hell of a rate. The thing for you to do is pick up a bulletin and say, now let's see, it says something here about routine 1. Now, describe to me in a few words what routine 1 is. And the person says, well, that's tell a person to be 3 feet back of his head, isn't it? Yeah, well, he has never read that bulletin. And you've been telling him to put it into effect. And he's never read it. I've got a wonderful example of that right now on the administrative lines I was just making a crack about. I have a report through the lines that a certain area was utterly disregarding all bulletins because they were so busy in the middle of an emergency they couldn't put any of them into an effect, you see, because the emergency they were having with finances and other things, you see. I got that report through from an independent source that they just didn't know anything about any bulletins. And sure enough, about 3 days later, I get a total 1-1 piece of nonsense about how everything is going broke. And it's all a big emergency. It's just a total glee of insanity all the way through this report. How do you like that? Just glee of insanity. Backing up the hearse, telling you how bad it all is, and so forth. Well, look, if these characters have never followed any instructions of any kind whatsoever, I can guarantee you they'll be in trouble. They'll just be in over their heads. Particularly if they have carefully reversed every instruction they had heard a rumor of. You see how that goes hand in glove? So it happens on administrative lines, and it's something for a man in business to know. If somebody's department is going all wrong, and you just can't seem to put it right, you just can't seem to issue orders that put it right, and you just can't seem to do anything to put it right, it's about time you looked for the gross error. Because it's not a little error if he has one too many motions in feeding the stuff to the accounts machines. It's not that at all. It's the fact that every time he receives the mail, he dumps it in the wastebasket. See, it's that kind of an error. And this goes hand in glove with, he feeds you bad news and he says he can't do the job and there isn't any way possible to get the show on the road, and usually goes along with, he needs more appropriation for his department and more help. All these things sort of fit in the package. See? All right, you say, well, a poor guy is struggling there and maybe he isn't very bright and you were being very, very kind, patient, and so forth about this. And so you try to give him help by giving him instructions. And he keeps coming back and telling you that the instructions didn't work and the department doesn't get any better. Well, the whole thing about it is you never gave instructions that had anything to do with what was wrong in the department. What you should do about the time something really starts to run real wrong is to go look for the gross error, and just keep looking for the gross error, because you'll find so many minor errors that they will trap your attention. And so you never see the gross error. Got the idea? You look at these little errors. Naturally, such a person in auditing a case would have all of his rudiments out or something like this, naturally. But look for the gross error. What is the error here? And you've got a case that just doesn't advance or things just aren't going. What is the error? It's big. Be something like the order. He just hasn't a clue. You might discover it by looking at him and find out he holds the E-meter upside down. I mean, it'll be something weird like this, you know. And it almost exceeds your imagination. But it also comes out of the impulse to make nothing out of something. You've got to make nothing out of something. And this comes back to a subject known as productivity, which businessmen are very interested in, and which Russia's going to pieces on, and which England could do much better with. And the United States is going down for the third time on. The effort to produce is 1/2 of the dichotomy. And all strikes and everything else are on a single button. And that is the effort not to produce. And you've got people all over the place who are totally dedicated to non-production. Totally dedicated to no results. I'm afraid that's a fact. Totally dedicated to no survival of a situation. Well, it comes about naturally. That's half the dichotomy. You keep telling them, all right, the organization's got to survive, the organization, the state, the nation, the group, mankind, got to survive, and it just runs. It gets into a stuck flow, and you develop a bunch of people that quite automatically go on the basis of the organization must not survive, and are just thinking day and night how to put it out of business, thinking day and night how to put the government out of business. There's one department in the United States that just must sit up all night long just trying to figure out ways and means how to stop the United States from surviving. If they just sat back and relaxed, or they all went home, or all went and played golf, or drowned themselves in the Potomac, or something like that, you'd be surprised. Probably United States international relations would right themselves instantly, because there's an enormous amount of guys doing business all over the world who probably are far, far more competent than anybody in the State Department. Similarly, we look down here in the Treasury Department, or look down here at the Chancellor of the Exchequer, and we find him all the time trying to figure out something new, extraordinary, and strange and different. And the only time when it really got to going good in the last few years is when I think he got sick or something. And it was just going dandy there for a while. And there were a whole bunch of graphs published showing during the period of minimal restriction that everybody's savings increased, the purchasing power of the country almost doubled, and so forth, until they all got active on financial planning, the planned balanced economy thing. By the way, they get that from Marquette. Marquette always had planned balanced economies. Everybody was broke and starving all the time. And so what happened? They put on a bunch of restrictions because all of a sudden everybody got into a panic. Now, Jersey right now is a little tiny dot of rock over here, and Jersey had a lot of hot money coming in. It was tax money, and if you had the money in Jersey, you didn't have to pay income tax on it. So here was this flood of hot money coming into Jersey. Jersey's broke, it's poor, it doesn't have very much to do with, has nothing much to build with. All of a sudden, people borrowed this hot money and started building hotels and doing other things around, and right away everybody in Jersey, almost without exception, got around and started complaining, and groups started to form to stop this hot money, because it was somehow or another bad. Because the balloon might suddenly be pricked, and there might be a tremendous crash. Now, did they sit around and think how to employ that money? Did they sit around and think how to fix up a community here with all the available capital they needed so that everybody had a good show, they were all nicely employed, and it was all running off gorgeously? Did they spend a moment of time doing this? They sure didn't. No, they just said, how can we stop this flow? We've got to make this prosperity stop, man, or we've had it. We've had it. But what's had it? The ambition not to produce has had it. And that ambition would cease to exist, and therefore would die and perish. You see how this could be? So you get strikes. You never kid yourself much about strikes. Strikes will eventually slaughter free enterprise. Strike in the last half century has drifted these nations over into greater and greater socialisms. Oh, I'm sure there was some recourse to low wages and working 24 hours a day and all of this sort of thing, I'm sure. But I'm equally sure that nobody found the remedy yet. That I'm equally sure of. I'm sure communism isn't the remedy, socialism isn't the remedy, none of these things are. That I'm sure of. Because all it is this button of no produce. It is a hot button, it's no production. You will find it there on your create scale. If it isn't in your secondary scale, which I haven't looked over, finalized yet, or checked against everything, it certainly is a wide hole missing on your secondary scale. So you ought to put this button produce in there, and you ought to put non-produce right in alongside of it. And that one I know isn't in the scale. I've just been exploring this. Non-production. Our goal is non-production. If we can just keep everybody fooled enough, we'll have it. Now, the goal can also be no results. If anybody obtains any results around here, it'll be over my dead body personally. My primary goal and ambition will have utterly ceased, and that will be the end of it if anybody ever makes a gain. You got the idea? Well, that could be a psychotic state of mind. And when you see errors of gross magnitude continually occurring, we all make mistakes. I can make mistakes, you can make mistakes, everybody can make mistakes. The trick is to be right a majority of the time. Most of the time, be right. Don't ever try to be 100% perfect. Just try to be right most of the time. And boy, you're batting so high above the national average that you really succeed, see? A lot of people go around with total perfection, you know. They can't get anything done because, well, it wouldn't exactly be right. I had a guy like this on board a yacht one time, and he managed to try to burn the boat down a couple of times, and I finally decided I'd better send him ashore. I wasn't around. He was just a boat guard. But he would start monkeying around with washing a bulkhead. And he would get into a frantic state about the bulkhead, you know. And you'd go into the yacht and you would find this bulkhead has been washed. And he'd say, well, no, not yet. I'm not finished with it. And you'd happen to come back a couple of days later, and this bulkhead is still in the process of being washed. And a week later, the bulkhead is still in the process of being washed. And you say, what in the name of common sense is going on here? You're washing one bulkhead. He said, yeah, but it's not clean yet. You see, his idea that if he did anything, it had to be absolutely perfect. And if it wasn't absolutely perfect, why then he couldn't just leave it. You find artists down in Greenwich Village. They've got canvases around that are 2 inches thick with paint because they're trying to paint the perfect picture. And they're trying so hard to paint the perfect picture that they never paint a picture. It's good discipline sometimes for yourself that after you've done a sketch of something or after you've planned something out, it's actually good discipline. It sounds weird, sounds anti any training you have, of just say abruptly, that's finished and that's complete and that's the way we're going to do it, and never work out the final details, you know, and say, well, we'll do it that way. Just to teach yourself that not everything in the world perishes because you left out one little tiny detail or something. Now, people get too panic-stricken at making a mistake, and they get so panic-stricken at making a mistake they become unreasonably tense and unreasonably upset about learning the right way to do something, and they can't relax, you understand? So if they figure anything is worrying them this hard, then it's very easy for them to go over the borderline and just start insisting nothing get done. And there's a very thin line between total perfectionism and accomplish nothing. That's a very thin boundary, and it is very, very easily crossed. I'll tell you that sitting back with a cigar in your mouth, one of you girls, with your feet on the other chair, reading an e-meter occasionally, but perfectly willing to sit there and audit, actually could get results on a PC. Actually, you could actually do it. That's an interesting view of it, isn't it? View of the fact we're talking about perfection. Perfection, you got to do them absolutely perfect, the TRs and all that sort of thing. It's only after you can do them all perfect that you can relax and put your feet on a chair and smoke a cigar and get results on the PC. You got the idea? Because your anxiety is no longer present. Your anxiety is no longer present, is no longer communicating to the PC. Le resulta, you are in the clear, so what you say counts. As a matter of fact, I can audit with tremendously precise formality, and I can do tone 40s with great precise formality. But I can also, with my pen still in my hand, midway toward writing a letter someplace or another, pick an e-meter up, stand it on its edge at the desk, make somebody sit down and pick up the cans, and do a good job of assessing them. And then turn the e-meter off and thank them very much and tell them I'm not assessing them, and I'll go back to writing a letter. But that's because they haven't got any feeling of anxiety about it, and I haven't got any feeling of anxiety about it, and I can do the job, and they know it, and there's many monkey business about it. Get the idea? Mm-hmm. But there's tremendous strain of to get everything right. Get everything absolutely right. If I can just get this absolutely, if I can just get my little finger held just right as I'm gripping the e-meter, you see, and if I look at the PC just right, and I don't make any mistakes of any kind whatsoever, why, maybe I'll get a result. No, you won't get any result. Because the gross thing about auditing is missing. You don't have any confidence. You don't exude any confidence. And what's the primary thing in Dianetics? The old thing, the one thing that you could always do. You could give people hope. And you, with all this tension, have given them no hope at all. Now, I'm not trying to make a big bunch of nonsense here and build up this idea of a gross auditing error and then tell you a lot of minor auditing errors and tell you they're gross. But look, being one of the fundamental purposes in dissemination, or one of the fundamental actions which you can undertake to make anybody well, how about omitting it from the sessions, huh? And let's just omit it totally. PC comes in, sits down, we don't pay any attention to what he's doing and so forth. We make sure that our feet are planted right on the floor and we're getting all set to do TR0. We aren't even aware of who the PC is or in trouble or anything else. And we sit down in the chair and you say, is it all right? Let's see, where's my paper? Yeah, well, is it all right with you if I begin this the session? This session? The session. See, the fundamental has been neglected. The fundamental is simply that you are there to make somebody better. In view of the fact that goal is all out, then the results you see from there on are quite minor, because you're not trying to do anything for them. See, what you're doing is trying to be perfect. So if I can teach you how to do all these things perfectly and get you to a point of insouciant confidence so that you can put your feet on the chair and a cigar in your mouth and balance the E-meter and wiggle the tone arm with your big toe and still get results and not have the PC feel that this is the least bit strange. You get the difference of frame of mind? PC wouldn't feel this was strange if you really knew your business. Right, sir. Where you ought to. Of course, now he makes his fatal error. He goes out, he asks you covertly, what brand of cigars do you smoke? It's the same old gag, isn't it? The fundamental error you can make, of course, is not wanting to help the PC and not helping the PC. That would be the fundamental error, isn't it? Well, if you can get over worrying at all about your technology, worrying at all about model sessions, do standing on your head, you know, TR, bang, TRs, and do that. Man, when you can confront somebody leaning over a rail on a ferry boat and do a better job of confronting than anybody else on that ferry boat, you could audit in that position. See, in order to break the rules, you have to be able to be acquainted with all of them. And then you can go ahead and break all the rules you want to, as long as you don't commit any one of these fundamental errors, like not being present at the auditing session, or auditing with a dead meter, or auditing with one that's got one of these grains of dust into its pot so that it does nothing but rock slam. You just go on auditing the rock slam out of the PC, and of course the PC hasn't been rock slamming on anything, and then justify it all by saying, well, Ron says that rock slams persist often. And you know one of these meters will rock slam if it gets a drain of dust in its pot? You know, the way to cure it is just to shake the tone arm around a little bit. And if that doesn't cure it, drop a little bit of lighter fluid in it and shake it around a couple of times and it won't do it anymore. All right, I've given you a very random discourse, but I hope I've given you something to operate with. Instant reads. If right now you can get accustomed to this instant read, that's another brand of confidence. And you'll get this brand of confidence sooner or later. You'll get it straight. You right now are, I'm sure, in a slightly leery frame of mind about, well, let's see, did he say 1/10 of a second? Let's see, was that 1/10 of a second or 1/20th of a second? Or was it really a half a second? How long did it take the needle to react? Well, we'll spread it out to 3 seconds, and we'll call that instant, and then we'll be safe. No, you won't. And then you'll feel very funny about going across a question. You read this question and there's no reaction on the meter, and you'll feel very funny about leaving the question. You'll say, well, I was being very unthorough. So you read the question again, you get a latent response. Well, maybe your latent response is something on this order. You read the question, this re-stimulated something in the PC that really isn't on the subject of the question, but is a borderline. You got the idea? All right, you re-stimulate the borderline when you read the question. Now you read the question again just to be sure, because you're unconfident, you see. And the moment you do that, you wait for it for a moment, and all of a sudden it reacts. You have not got an answer to the question. What you've got is some allied activity of some kind or another. You've got it way over in left field, and you'll get that when you get to it. So your security check is thorough enough now. You'll get it someplace on the security check. You'll get it as an instant response. Got the idea? You could spend hours cleaning off all the fringes of the chicken house without ever getting a chicken to eat. You could. Just spend hours and hours and hours cleaning off these latent responses. They're all elsewhere. All right? You just have to give yourself some experience of watching that meter, and if it doesn't go pang, you just skip it. That works with goals assessments too, you know. You read off the goal, and then you say, and 1, and 2, and 3, and 4, and fall. And you say, well, that one is still hot. I don't know whether that one is hot, or China is hot, or anything else. It's the same question as, what did the needle start to rise on? Your latent response is, what did the needle start to fall on? You cannot answer the question, so therefore you might as well neglect it. You're not sure. You're liable to leave the PC in a total flub and fog. Why is that needle falling? He will say. And you'll still get latent responses. If you've got the question, he always gets an instant response. It works like this. You say, well, did you ever illicit diamonds by? And he illicit diamonds bought. Believe me. You haven't got buy out of your mouth. Buy. You got to fall. Okay, that's it. And until he gives you that one on a Joburg, it will just keep falling. Instant response. You ask the question, get an instant response. You ask the question, get an instant response. It won't erase. It'll just stay there. Doesn't matter how many times he thinks of it. He's actively withholding it from you. But you'll get these latent responses on and on and on and on. Now, I want to point this out as a gross error, not only in auditing generally, but in my communication of auditing, and that gross error is simply this, and only this. You were auditing the analytical mind, and I hadn't noticed it. You weren't auditing the reactive mind, you were auditing the analytical mind. Therefore, your auditing target was off, and that all by itself could explain no clears. Instantly. I don't know how fast you can do an assessment now, how fast you can do an assessment now using only instant responses and erasing only instant responses. You do it the same way by elimination. I don't know how fast you can do it, but it's probably something on the order of 100th of the time you have been using to do it, okay? That was the main thing I came down to tell you today. Don't immediately think I'm trying to blame you or giving you a bunch of stuff here and saying, well, he's proving us all wrong. No. It hasn't done any harm to take off all the fringes. It hasn't done any harm. It's advanced the case sort of the hard way. It hasn't done any harm to assess a case the long way, you understand, and take all the ramifications and all the latent responses of it. That has not done anything at all. That is bad. It has wasted less auditing time than you think, because you were trying to run the whole case on the instant response and the latent response. And you were trying to run the reactive mind and the analytical mind. And it's only that time which you've devoted to straightening out the analytical mind, which was all right anyhow, that you wasted. So it hasn't been any vast catastrophe. But on the contrary, has been a considerable win, because I know now what you're trying to do. And it was different than what I was trying to do. I'm trying to knock out of the reactive bank those held down fives which a person can't think about and which add themselves into every equation. And if you just knock out those held down fives, the case will get all right fast. And if you go on worrying with the PC about why the fives are held down, but never under any circumstances really go looking for a held down five, of course you're going to get minimal results and minimal recoveries and minimal profile gains and all the rest of it. So it's all to the good. I mean, we've speeded up auditing right now 1,000 for 1 again. If we keep doing this, we'll have to watch it, because a person will write us a letter, but 2 days before that he got clear. They know when they were going to write us a letter because they went clear suddenly. Okay? All right, I've held you rather over long. There were some things I wanted to cover with you. I hope you think they were important enough to stay for. Thank you. This is what? This is the 13th? Ah, you see? See, unlucky for you, lucky for me. Born on Friday the 13th, you know. That was awful bad luck for the American Psychiatric and the British Medical. What questions do we have today? Now, I know how bright you are by the number of questions that you find out. Gee, that's pretty stupid. What are we going to do about this? Yes?
Carlin, this is for very late in routine 3. Say a terminal has reached the point where it no longer reacts at all on the primary scale. Is your next step then just to take it and methodically check off everything on the secondary scale before declaring that terminal flat, 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 and assessing for new terminal?
Well, you've got now a very advanced case of something or other. There are several things that are conditional to this. If the question is, what do you do late in a case about a terminal no longer reacts on the primary scale? Well, we used to just find another terminal. That was the first answer that was given to this thing, just find another terminal for that goal. And couldn't find another terminal for the goal. Why, find another goal, do another goals assessment. And you're in trouble right about that point, because your goals assessments keep running out. And you'll go all the way, you'll find a goal, you'll find a terminal, and it is all dandy, and you've got it all assessed, and you'll find one level on the prehab scale, and that is the end of that whole package. It just took just a look at the level and said, well, what do you know about that? And the fellow blows it. It's quite interesting. So your contest actually is not to go into the secondary scale and try to flounder all over the secondary scale and scrape this thing to the bone. The thing to do when you no longer can get, remember, you can also get a no assessment because of the rudiments being out. But your primary scale, no more reaction, your case well advanced, the needle very loose, 2-3 dial drop on a can squeeze test with your sensitivity at 0. Got the idea? It's banging against both pins of the can, you know. You just can't close it down. Well, what you'd have to do is do a new terminal assessment for the goal you were running. All right, that's fine. Terminal assessment all by itself may very well wind up that goal. The goal will still be live to some slight degree. Well, you go ahead, however, and try to assess, and then assess in the prehab scale and run these terminals for that same goal. Well, eventually you can't get any reaction on the goal, you can't get any reaction on any more terminals. That's it. You've got to do another goals assessment, just like you did originally. And this goals assessment will usually go fairly rapidly, and now it is less critical getting a wrong one. You can get a wrong one now, and it isn't going to do anybody any harm. You get a wrong one in the beginning, you can really throw somebody in the soup. So that is the way you handle this. And it's a very precise activity, actually. Once your first terminal that you're running can no longer assess on the primary prehab scale, you do a new terminal assessment for the goal you were running. If you can assess, you carry on as before with the new terminal. You finally get that goal totally out of the road. You do a new goals assessment, a new terminals assessment, a new level assessment, and now the fun begins. Because you will start doing a new goals assessment, a new terminals assessment, and a new level assessment, and 5 commands, and that's the end of that level. That's the end of all levels. That's the end of that terminal. That's the end of that goal. Boom. All right. Now it gets more rapid than this. You do a goals assessment, and you can find a terminal for it. And the second you found the terminal, you don't any longer get to the prehab scale. It's now evaporated. It's gone utterly. Now, you have to keep your rudiments in. The only thing that fool you if the rudiments go out on you, because you see you can null the whole meter because the person's got a PT problem, his attention is on everything else. All right. It eventually boils down to where you get the goal, then you get the terminal, and you can't get it over to the scale. The first clear that was made in South Africa, we were in stitches, because the poor girl for 2 days had been trying to find goals and terminals and get them to the scale. She would find them all right and try to get them to the scale or get them to run or get a command, and they just fold up. And then she'd try this again, and it'd fold up, and it'd do it again, and it'd fold up. And she finally was in a panic, and she came to the instructors, and she said, "Oh, my goodness, I've just ruined this case." Yes, she had. She sure had ruined that case. And then after she kept this up for just a few days, actually, all of a sudden the case no longer reacted in any way, shape, or form on an E-meter. There wasn't anything you could do to this case. Now, there's a complete difference from your bottom scale case. Bottom scale case, you can hit a guy over the head and you get no reaction on the E-meter. But the needle is not a floating needle, and the sensitivity knob is very high, and this case cannot answer questions regarding help or control. So know them by these marks. Now you get it up at the other end, and it's just a floating situation, and it goes on, and there's nothing you can do, and you can't get the E-meter influenced. And that person is clear. Now you go ahead and stabilize the clear by going on and trying to do this. You understand, it's not good enough just to get a floating needle at the end of the run. You go on trying to find a goal, trying to find a terminal. Your effort to do so blows up the remaining stuck goals and terminals on the track. It isn't that you're conducting a fruitless search just because you can't find it on the E-meter. And you have to do this for quite a while. And all of a sudden, why, you're now approaching up to a level of theta clear, and you get a stable mesh clear. This person won't fall downhill. We've got a clear right now that is just ruining a whole central organization. It's disgraceful. She went down to Hazy Joburg to help teach a course. They didn't find any people for her, and she found everybody sitting around their desk not doing very much. So she wound up and started giving a PE course, as well as giving the day course, and found out they weren't writing anybody any letters, that she considered this. And so she started, after a PE course, apparently in the evening or some such thing, however it goes, she started catching up on their mail for them. Here's the thing. You've got stuck valent serenity mixed up with a state of clear. And you do have practically until you get to be clear. And you say now, a clear would always be serene and would never be the effect of anything. You get the idea? You've got the Buddhist definition here. And man, that was wrong end too. That was an absolute guarantee of plowing somebody in. Well, now a clear doesn't act that way. They are rather responsive, not reactively responsive.
in that you say good morning to them and they fly through the roof, like aberrated people do, but they have another type of response. You say, well, it can't be done, and it's all too sad, and isn't this terrible? And you're liable to get almost anything. It's a grim thing to be around one, because they are volatile. They react to life, in other words. They are alive. And of course, everybody knows that's very dangerous. They also, however, don't get into irrational arguments with you. That is what's devastating, is that when they say something's wrong, it normally is. It isn't that they think it is wrong. It normally is. That's it. So what you're looking at is somebody who is alive and who can react and so forth. Remember, the biggest invalidation that the poor board of directors, the Hubbard Dynamic Research Foundation, they had me all mocked up as clear as near beer, and I got mad at them one day for telling me that everybody ought to be run upside down at the end of the corridor, or some perfectly valid thing. And I got mad, and they all went white. Hardly see them. The walls were white, too. They all rushed out and went back to their offices and sat there gloomily. And, well, we thought you must be clear, you see, so this had invalidated the whole thing. Brother, that's not true. It wasn't that I was clear, but when my experience on the thing, a person, when he approaches sanity, reacts very sanely, and they react volatilely on the emotional scale. They're not unpredictable. They're very predictable. You come in and drag an old dead dog that's been rolled in carrion and throw it in the middle of the rug in the living room, you're going to hear about it, man. You're not repressed concerning what they think about this activity. So you're not making a bunch of serene beings, you see. You're not trying to put somebody at 90,000 feet up, flat on his back, looking at the clouds for the rest of his existence. And I think probably the reason Joburg got allergic to developing clears in the HTC is the clears kept saying they got this kind of a notion. When a person gets clear, they tell you, let's get the show on the road. Let's get something going. Let's get something doing around here. And let's do this and that big stack of papers you got there, they're probably not very important. Let's get on to something else here now, and so on, and the money starts coming in, and things start happening, and people start getting well, and everybody starts getting happy and enjoying life, and you just can't have that kind of thing. So the way to keep from having that kind of thing, of course, is to cut back clearing. That's the normal answer. Yes, I know I'm branding an organization on tape. It'll go to other organizations, but this one needs branding. I left it in perfectly marvelous condition 10 weeks ago. It only took them 10 weeks to pull the rug out, to get it in a state of emergency. Only they're unlucky right at the present moment because they got a clear in their midst. Horrible. So clearing them up, don't leave them just because the needle only floats. Clear them up all the way. You audit them as far as you can audit them, and after a while, it'll even look foolish to you to audit them. They blow by inspection. Everything is blowing by inspection. Everything rationalized by inspection. You could keep up this process, but after a while, it was senseless to have the person on a meter because the meter hasn't reacted for about 10 or 15 hours processing. So you'd run them without a meter. But you could keep up the same process and probably arrive at much higher states. You'd probably arrive at theta clear with the same thing I've just given you. See? You'd probably arrive at OT with the same thing I've just given you. There isn't any reason why you really have to shift gears into something else. Only trouble is, after a while, they cease to have answers to these things because they think and they evaporate. Now, there are other processes that you can do. Now, on the final thing, I'm just thinking, just off to the club here, what I'd finally do to somebody before I actually released them, I would read to them probably the whole of the secondary scale from one end to the other, still on a meter, you see, and ask them to look over their consideration about these things. And you'd probably blow the latent and remaining reactive locks. All right, that's how it is done, okay?
By the way, there's something on pertinent to clear, so I must make a remark. Every once in a while, when the little red brothers are amongst us, they have a ball waving their hand over somebody and getting them clear. And you get rumors all over the place about how this is occurring now. This is occurring. All you have to do is spit in somebody's direction or something like that, and they're clear. And they have this marvelous new technique. What they actually do, they have this marvelous new technique to kill somebody or something like that. Had anything to do with the price of fish. It's very, very interesting that this always gets afloat anytime the organization is successful in clearing people. You always pick up these instantaneous clear rumors. And they're not true, and don't fall for them. Because I'm telling you, I have had cases over the jumps now for man and boy now. These 14 years or better. And there is no thought process. No thought, single button process. I'll tell you this advisedly. That will produce a clear. There is no single button. Nor is there any shot in the arm that'll produce a clear. The fellow has got to get out of the trap the same way he came in. He's got to walk out the labyrinth the same way he walked into the labyrinth, which was overwhelming and getting overwhelmed. And if you don't if you don't underwhelm him in reverse to all of the overwhelms, you've got a guy who simply goes in to one of these super serene valences and sits on Buddha's navel or something and regards his cloud nine. You got the idea. That's just a bunch of balderdash. When you think of the amount of overwhelming that has been going on in the last 200 trillion years, it is no wonder a few people get in the wrong valences. Particularly since we continue to overwhelm valences that are not desirable valences. And then we had no mechanism to unoverwhelm having overwhelmed. Got the idea? Scientology is the first mechanism which does both. And that is why it is good and valid. And if it didn't do both, it wouldn't be valid. In other words, after you've overwhelmed something, the penalty for having overwhelmed or eradicated this badness, you see, can itself be erased. You see how this is? So it's the first thing that ever did it both ways. And when you hear about somebody picking up the magic needle and by giving somebody a shot in the arm concerning this, and the person went clear as near beer, why, yawn for me, will you? If there had been such a thing, I'm pretty sure I would have found it. This is a very odd remark for me to make, but I would have found it in the last 14 years, because there isn't any thought combination or directional combinations that we haven't been into. There isn't one left. I've even calculated it totally out. How many possible potentials of thought combinations are there? The mere fact that flows exist defeats at once a single button. Just the fact that flows exist. Immediately you've got two buttons. You've got them doing it to you and you doing it to them. There's some kind of a wild rumor going on that the phrase, the single phrase, is clearing people like mad around in England, and it runs like this. Let me see, what is it now? What would you be pleased to accept? Oh, that's a wonderful way to plow somebody in. Just look at it. And the flow's going to stick. And I'll tell you something. It was run to its ragged bottom in 1954. Look it up in the records if you don't believe me. That subject has been covered and covered and recovered. And there wasn't anybody clear. And as a matter of fact, one poor little girl from Canada was walking around. She couldn't enter a room without walking around and hitting each wall on the process, on practically that exact process. You have in this case, by the way, somebody who has picked up an old record list. They're picking up all these old processes that produce a rapid result for a few minutes. And I can give you lists of them. If you want to prove Scientology works to somebody by spinning him, I can give you a long list of how to do this, exact phrases. One of them is look around here and find something you can go out of ARC with. This is what the fellow's trying to do. All he's got to do is spot this a few times. And if he just spots it just a very few times, this is okay. He'll feel fine. It's marvelous. And then, of course, he walks out and falls on the sidewalk flat on his face. Because you've said, what in the physical universe could you go out of communication with? With the connotation of what could you go out of affinity with, and what in the physical universe could you consider unreal? These old-time cults, like psychiatry, universityism, any one of these old cults has its button, and they are formed up normally on a single button. A monomania on a single button. And if you smoke out what this button is and run a reverse process on it, you will make that kind of a person out of the PC. Find out what the button is that would bring about a soldier. Just figure it out. What would a soldier be most monomanic about? Probably wanting to get out. Probably wanting to get out of the army, or trying to get people out of the army, or not destroying anything, or whatever it is that you work out finally, work it out. You get a few dozen soldiers and just run each one of them, professionals you see, and run each one of these things, a bunch of tests. You'd finally find a common denominator that'd make a soldier. Now, all right, now fix that up so it's non-therapeutic, you see, so it busts him out of communication with things, sticks the flow as a single button, and run that process, and the guy will all of a sudden look at you very fixedly and says, I think I will go join the army. And don't think this hasn't been known on the whole track. This is how they got recruits for space opera, for the State Department, for all kinds of... Got the idea? Actually, universities run these single buttons on people. One of the ways they do it in engineering schools is to continue to tell people that engineers are not wanted anymore. That is usually stabilized and standard. And the fellow comes up and tries to be a better engineer, so he'll be one of the few select that are wanted. And all these little mechanisms, see? In the Christian church, they get you stuck in God by running the line blasphemy. Thou must not talk to God. You mustn't say anything bad about God. You mustn't be in communication with God. God isn't there. You can't talk to him. You mustn't communicate with God. All right, if you set somebody down and say, all right, get the idea of not communicating with God. Good. Get the idea of not communicating with God. Good. Get the idea of not communicating with God. Good. Get the idea. And ARC broke him while you were running it. Get your rudiments out. And have somebody ring him on the phone in the middle of the session and tell him his wife has just left him or something like this. In other words, get ARC breaks and present time problems and go on and run this. Go out of communication with God. Go out of communication with God. All of a sudden the fellow gets a starry-eyed look on his face. He actually could. He walked right straight out and join a nunnery or whatever it is they join. You got the idea? In other words, you can take the whole track fixations of a person and re-stimulate them selectively and bring about momentary resurgences in certain goals' directions. And you can do it. It can be done. So anytime we start cleaning people up, always somebody's going to step forward and remember one of these old, reactively, they get the way they got trapped. See? And then they decide that if they run that on everybody, then they'll all be all right. You see, there's that one thing. In other words, they're auditing their own case on somebody else. You hear these rumors every time. I had to put that in, by the way, as a footnote, because it's rather unusual to have two continents go crazy at once. But it is also equally unusual to not have any continent crazy at one time. Wing, you had a question.
Yes, taking what you said about James' question. Remember that list of ultimate processes? Remember that list of ultimate processes?
Yeah, outlawed processes, right.
Fit them in for me, please.
Huh?
Fit them in for me, please.
Well, now do I remember the same list? These processes are the reverse processes that are non-therapeutic? Is that?
No, please.
The ultimate processes. Those are OT processes.
Right. Now.
You'd flatten them. way after you've done everything I've just talked to you about.
That's all I wanted to know.
Yeah, then you'd flatten those. Make sure, however, you had a free-floating needle, that you had exhausted every ramification of SOP goals. There was nothing left, because only then will those other processes function.
Thank you.
Good. Okay, any more questions? Yes?
Yeah. I've been kind of surprised that on SOP goals, nobody that I know of has had a sixth dynamic terminal turn up to get audited on. Yet, certainly Theory 67 was sure pretty correct. We got awfully good results running stuff like motion, objects, and things. Just to surprise me. What I was wondering are they likely to turn up? Would there be any objection whatsoever if somebody's got a box or a sphere or something representing the goal to go ahead and run it?
Oh, well, you want to know why no six dynamic terminals are turning up on goals assessments. Well, that's just the peculiarities of the game. They're totally allowed for in the assessment. Nobody's steering them in it. But actually, you're talking to the person normally as a human being. And this in itself tends to throw the assessment. Thank you. Thank you. I can tell you how this six dynamic thing works. When the person can no longer be a beingness, they, you might say, extrovert into and permanently permeate some object or housing or familiar thing around a beingness. And it's just like the fellow gets hanged and he goes and becomes the headsman's blocks or something because that was less painful, you know. It's, he's been overwhelmed, or he's been a headsman for several lifetimes, and all of a sudden somebody makes a mistake of hanging him, and this isn't right, and it upsets him. It throws his beingness way out, and he ceases to become a person, and then he goes into an object. You could very well have a case that you would miss on, because it couldn't be assessed with SOP goals, apparently. It just was having an awful time being assessed with SOP goals. And you go along happily trying to do something for this person, and you just can't seem to find a terminal. Well, you should inspect your interrogation for a terminal as to whether or not it is totally throwing the question into a live beingness. Such as, well, who would be a person who would want to create a mathematical scale? Now, what person would want to commit a mathematical scale? See? What person? What person? And your question might actually be putting nothing but beingness on the line in terms of livingness. And it might totally exceed the needs and necessities of the case, whereas the case would respond very easily on what would invent a mathematical scale, you see. So you can throw an assessment off of the six when it should be on the six. And I'd say if nobody is doing that at all, nobody ever finds a six at all, I would say there's possibly something awry with the pattern, which tends to sling it over onto the other dynamics and keep it off the six. Because it's very true. People make terrific gains with six dynamic terminals. As a matter of fact, lots and lots of cases run most easily on six dynamic terminals. For instance, I know I myself probably could do something about the beingness of a typewriter or something like that. When you've pounded, just thinking of it offhand, of a beingness, when you've knocked, 20, 30, 40 million words through a machine, why, it's a cinch that now and then you begin to wonder if your ribbons aren't unwound. You get the idea. But just the fact that I would know about it would probably preclude anything very desperate being there. You take, well, now there was one case in an ACC one time, the first 15 minutes of play, this fellow was going to leave and go back to Chicago, and he was all very upset and so forth, and I grabbed hold of him for 15 minutes. I traced back his last life, by the way. He'd been killed at the Battle of Jutland on a British destroyer. This was over in Arizona. Shows you how far you'll run sometimes from a battle. And get to total water to no water, you know. And this boy had been killed on the foredeck of a destroyer, and in this lifetime had been a machinist. And the bug of the factor, the guy didn't know, and what he didn't know was that it wasn't machinery or that sort of thing was upsetting him. It was a ship's metal. And I picked this up, wham, bam, just investigating this kind of having this thing. Made him walk up a few destroyers and shove them into his body, and that was the end of the case. Case made terrific case progress afterwards. The case was just totally stuck in that incident, in other words. All right, there was a case where the resolution of the case depended on the discovery of a sixth dynamic terminal, but rapidly, because he was busy being destroyed. Another case that was a total hang-up on the 3rd South African, came back to Battery fast. I remember Susie telling me with what disgust that she had finally found this fellow's terminal. She herself was having a little trouble with space opera at the time she was doing this. And she told me with enormous disgust that she'd found this fellow's terminal. And she said it so disgustedly that I said, well, all right, what's the matter? Is it the right terminal? Oh, yes, it's the right terminal. Did he refuse to run it? Oh, no. Was he interested in it? Oh, yes, he's very interested in it. Well, how did it go in the first little period of audit? Well, it went fine. We found its level just easy. I said, well, what's wrong with this terminal? Well, she says, the spacecraft. Can't imagine anybody having a terminal like that. Auditor's response to the PC's terminal. Very amusing. Anyway, that's the gist of it. 6 dynamic terminals will turn up, and if you can't find any kind of a terminal to fit something or other, inspect your question. You're saying, well, who would shoot kings? Who would shoot kings? Who? That's maybe what you're using. And you probably should ask the question, what would shoot a king? And somebody says a gun, of course. Bang, there it is. There's your terminal. Terminal is gun. Yes?
Ron, when you have exhausted a great number of terminals, goals rather, and you run the terminal flat for that very particular goal, a whole big list, we'll say. Now, what happens when you have to assess for a new goal, we'll say? Do they go back over those same goals?
Oh, no. I wouldn't waste time on the original list. Most of them, and some of them are going to come back.
That's what I mean.
You're going to get some of those goals back. But I'd say the fastest way to do it is go make a new goals list. I'd say that was the fastest way to do it rather than to plow through a bunch of other stuff. But if I was unable to find a goals list, only then would I go back and dig up the fellow's first goals list. And now I would go over this goals list again and see if anything is live now, you see. I try to do it the easy way and get away with it often enough to save time, see, which is just make a new goals list and so on. You realize, of course, that if at the end of clearing a person is blowing by inspection or blowing by repeater technique, which is constant repetitive inspection, if a fellow is blowing at that end of it, don't be so surprised or don't be amazed that it takes a long while to do goals assessment. What you're doing is running SOP goals. And a comment came the other day from the area that's under a curse just now. I probably have plagues there any minute. Was that the SOCSEC told the DAP, well, this PC isn't getting many gains, or vice versa. And the SOCSEC says, well, what's happening with the case? And so on. The DAP said, well, he's just had 12 hours of assessment. That's why there's no change. And the SOCSEC said, well, all right, then that explains it. Please tell me what this explains. I don't get this. You see, it just would not explain anything. You mean you can assess somebody for 12 hours and get no gain on the case at all? Well, that's silly. You're actually running the end process of SOP goals at the beginning. And you're cleaning this case up in all directions. So, obviously, the case is being run In an auditing room, he can't tolerate with a PT problem, with a big ARC break. In an improper assessment with an auditor who is invalidating him, and who is doing the other remaining clauses of the auditor's code backwards. And I would say offhand that would probably account for no gain whatsoever in 12 hours of goals assessment. But only that would account for it, see? So they said, well, that explains it. Yeah, well, the devil it does. I was talking to you yesterday about watch it now. If you're getting no gain, and the error is gross, not little. The error is big. So it wasn't a goals assessment at all. It was the trouble with the case. There was something very wild about this case. You do get gains along this line. If you do a goals assessment right, every hour of it is auditing. If you do a Joburg right, every hour of it is auditing. Man, you should see those needles loosen up. What are you trying to do in the last run? You're trying to loosen up the needle, bring down the sensitivity knob, and straighten up the reading of the tone arm, right? Well, a goals assessment does all those things, so it must be getting somewhere. Furthermore, it improves profiles and does other things. Otherwise, there is no advantage in an assessment. But you shouldn't develop the notion that it's because it's taking you so long to assess that you're not getting any place, or you shouldn't feel disappointed because your assessment is not getting any place. Yes, your assessment is getting someplace all the way. If your rudiments are in, if you're doing it by the auditor's code in model assessment, you are doing more for the case for every hour of assessment than was done in 25 hours just 2 years ago. See, that's hour for hour. We're speeding it up, speeding it up, speeding it up. And it's damn good auditing. One of the reasons it might prove to be untherapeutic is the person didn't think it was auditing and didn't think it should improve the case, and therefore became very careless on how he did it or how he handled the PC. I've seen a case of that. I have a case of that, yeah, where the auditor finally said, well, it isn't as if we're running a session, and having invalidated a lot of the PC's goals and so forth. Of course, the PC practically folded up. Right in the middle of session, he's told that they're not having a session. That was when all goals assessment went instantly into model session. The history of that. Okay, any other questions? All right. Well, I understand that you're making progress, I trust. Now, let me ask this. Let me ask a couple of questions here before we wind up this lecture. Is there anything you don't know? And the other question is, any of you think you're totally hung up and making no progress of any kind whatsoever? Any case think it's in that kind of condition? All right, okay. Good enough. We do have some equipment to be installed down the hall here in the old wine vat. You look down the hall there, you find the old wine vat, and it actually already has this lead door. We've had the lead door installed and so forth. So if your cases don't make any progress, why, it isn't the last resort. Okay, thank you very much.